Chapter 625. Inuji lowered his eyes, sighing silently. But right beside Huaishur, a roar sounded out. "So you do have ulterior motives, you sneaky person." The tall and sturdy warrior stood up. A blazing origin substance fluctuation turned into a faint flame, enveloping his entire body. He angrily stared at the seemingly innocent Kaoriheim in front of him, widening his eyes, not allowing her any chance to speak. "Questions and answers are useless. Let me, Inuji Yoshi, measure whether or not you have the capacity to match your ambition." Huaishur could not help but want to sigh. "So, can you people of Ingzhou not be so chinibyu? Can you speak properly?" And Inuji Yoshi had already raised his hand that had turned into black iron, pulling towards her. Boom! The entire room suddenly shook. A hurricane swept through. The long sleeves instantly shattered, revealing an iron-colored arm underneath, the veins bulging, the exaggerated muscles exploding with enough power to destroy iron walls. This was the inheritance from the 60th generation, Tengu Yokozuna. After thousands of practice, it was an incomparably pure skill. Chumo sumo! Out! The tea in the tea tray flew up, falling back into the cup, only leaving behind ripples. And Inuji Yoshi's movements stiffened in place, because in the same place, the kneeling Kaoriheim raised a finger. Casually, she pushed it upwards. The sound of steel colliding exploded. The mechanical hand hidden under the glove shook slightly, but did not have the slightest bit of resistance, easily blocking Inuji Yoshi's explosive power. Only the tea beside her slightly rippled, but that was all. Inuji Yoshi's face was ashen, gradually turning red, but no matter how much strength he exerted, the strength that he was so proud of was unable to move this damned woman even an inch from her original position. Even it was slowly pushed up, little by little. Huaishur raised his eyes, looking at the ashamed and humiliated face, expressionless. This was purely the drummer's advanced citation. It seemed to be played down, but in reality, the number of fingers and strength were not absolutely related. "Enough, Yoshi." Quan Jiang raised his eyes and looked over, telling him, "You are not her opponent. Moreover, isn't this all in accordance with the rules?" Inugawa Yoshi did not say anything. In his silence, he pulled back his hand and moved back to Inugawa Yoshi's side. Huaishur didn't counterattack or rush to give him a beating. Instead, he raised his head and looked at the old man in front of him. She waited for his reply, until Quan Jiang sighed. "Since Miss Shinichi said so, then from now on, this old man will register your name on the official list." He stared at the girl beside Huaishur and asked softly, "What does this mean? You understand? Starting from 5 minutes later, you will be the enemy of all your loved ones." Quan Jiang said in a deep voice, "No matter if it is your uncle, your brother, or your sisters, they have always been kind and reserved. But when the time comes, they will not let you live or die on your own. Instead, they will treat you as an opponent and look for your every weakness. Then they will use all means to defeat you until you fall into the abyss, without any possibility of turning back. No matter what agreement you have with Hupa, it is not a strategy that you can sit back and relax. When necessary, I may even give up on justice and suppress you. Unless you are above everyone else, you will be trampled under their feet. Shinichi, the current Rigian family, is such a cruel place. Are you sure you want to come back?" In the silence, Shinichi's eyes trembled slightly. After a long time, she nodded. Her fingers that were grabbing Huaishur's clothes were so nervous that they turned white, but she was still holding on. "Very good." Not knowing if it was praise or mockery, Quan Jiang nodded. "As an elder of the Rigian family, I announce that from now on, you are also a candidate for the next head of the Rigian family. Shinichi, I hope you will not regret it. As the weakest one, your first battle will be tonight. I hope what awaits you at that time will not be a tragedy." He held his knees and slowly got up. Finally, he nodded to the little girl in front of him and turned to leave. But before he went out, he heard a voice behind him. It was Shinichi. Mr. Quan Jiang. The girl knelt down and bowed to the old man's back. She lowered her head and said goodbye softly. All this time, my mother and I have troubled you and Uncle Jiaoshan to take care of us. It's just my duty. The old man's footsteps paused for a moment. Then he pushed the door open and left. In the following time, no one came to disturb them. After moving to an independent courtyard, they didn't even have any servants. The large courtyard was cold and cheerless. It felt like the treatment was much worse than before. But in fact, for a candidate, this was the environment that they really needed. From the moment Shinichi nodded, anyone who dared to enter her residence was her enemy. In other words, even if Quan Jiang walked into this courtyard and was killed by Huaishe, no one could say anything. In the following days, except for the necessary appearance at lunch, they would spend most of their time here. For dinner, Huaishe didn't have to do anything. The girl from the countryside showed off the cooking skills that she learned at the place where she worked. Although he wanted to praise her, but a certain someone who was spoiled by feng shui felt that it was ordinary no matter how he ate. The ramen took a bit too long to cook. Because of the limited time, it wasn't very good. For tamagoyaki, the egg wasn't stirred long enough. The ratio of the fried dumpling fillings wasn't very accurate. Of course, there was no need to say such things that would spoil the mood. Eating was still eating, wasn't it? Huaishe used to eat vermicelli for every meal, but after the cooking demon got used to it, he still wanted to eat something with a little kick, with a faint expectation. Huaishe calmly leaned on the sofa and watched the variety show in Ingzhou, waiting quietly. Shinichi, who was originally very brave, was getting more and more nervous. As time went by, the night gradually deepened. The first cooking demon battle was about to begin. Because it wasn't an official competition of the cooking demon competition, it was absolutely impossible to allow dangerous people to appear in the current realm. Therefore, those strange judges wouldn't appear. The judges were the contestants of both sides. Simply put, they would cook for each other and eat, until one of them couldn't eat anymore. Either they would die from eating, or they would get sick from eating, or they couldn't take it anymore. Through their own works, they would show the essence of the abyss. If they couldn't take the other's work, they could only admit defeat. The battle between the cooking demons was that simple. Occasionally, there would be a situation where both sides would perish together, but this kind of situation was rare. Even if they did perish together, they would just perish together. Luck was also a part of the competition. If you didn't like it, don't play. How to put more evil in the creation, how to add the essence of corruption in the cooking, and how to digest the opponent's evil. Every part of the competition tested the strength and adaptability of the participating cooking demons. Under the deep night, a maid wearing a white beat mask led the way. All the way down, she led Huaishe and Shinichi into the underground space under the Rigian family's manor. It was spacious and huge, with a dome made of iron. Behind the grandstand that extended from the highest point, a few blurry figures could be vaguely seen. However, their appearances and faces couldn't be distinguished, and they didn't make any sound. They just whispered to each other through the curtain. What attracted the most attention was the audience on both sides of the arena. It wasn't as exaggerated as having no empty seats. This kind of thing couldn't be announced to the whole realm. Only the other candidates and their culinary demon representatives were here. When Huaishe raised her head, she immediately noticed a burly man with an earpiece standing at the back of the room, in the shadows where the lights couldn't reach. His body was covered in messy tattoos, and his body was as huge as a shedding bear. He sat on 2 chairs with his buttocks, and his arms were crossed as he looked at Huaishe. When Huaishir turned around to look at him, he whistled and gestured cheerfully. "Long time no see." Huaishir looked away and ignored him. He found a seat in the empty arena with Makoto and sat down. Makoto was far enough away from the other contestants, but he could still see their expressions. Other than Hupua, who didn't even look at Makoto, most of them were indifferent. They didn't look at her with disdain or anger. Instead, some of them were looking at the mixed-race girl who came all the way from the border to compete with them for the position of the head of the house. Don't be afraid. Just think of it as an audience at a cooking show. Don't smile too brightly when the camera shows you. Huaishir patted her shoulder and comforted her. After thinking for a while, he pulled out the disguised Lord of the Flies and put it in her hand. "If someone tries to approach after I go down later, you can just shoot them. It has a lock, so you don't have to worry about missing." Makoto was stunned. She looked down at the gun in her hand, feeling as if she was holding a hot potato. "Do I have to do this?" "For your safety, it's best. Don't show that I'm scared. Learn from your relatives. If you don't know what to do, just keep a straight face. If you don't want to hold it, just put it aside. The point isn't whether you dare to shoot, but whether they see it or not." Huaishir reached out and changed Lord of the Flies gear to trial mode. A cold aura spread out from the barrel of the gun. It was thin but sharp, and it stung all the eyes that dared to peek. Those sneaky eyes quickly retreated. Makoto followed Huaishir's instructions and casually put the gun on the chair next to her. Makoto, who was still scared, quickly adapted to the atmosphere in the arena and calmed down. Or, at least, she pretended to be calm. Even with her qualities, it was impossible for her to maintain vigilance at all times and be on guard against attacks. However, she could at least pretend to be calm in the face of danger. She couldn't react in time anyway. The rest was Huaishir's problem. When the bell rang, he walked into the arena and waited for his opponent until there was a strange sound in the tunnel opposite him. It sounded like there was some sticky liquid flowing in the pipe. A figure shrouded in darkness slowly appeared. Chapter 6:26. When that figure emerged from the darkness, all the cooking demon contestants frowned. The middle-aged man, dressed like a hippie, raised his hand and lifted his sunglasses, revealing a stunned expression. "It's just the opening match. Why did they arrange such a troublesome opponent?" Aram? I met that guy in America half a year ago." The hippie Aram shook his head and said, "He's a very troublesome opponent. He's slippery like a snake. Old Mr. Gua should know that, right? A 2-star chef demon from Ingzhou. He's a rising star in recent years. I've heard a little about him." The stooped old man from Dongxia leaned on his walking stick and studied the figure that was wrapped in resentment. He chuckled softly and said, "Shun Jinqing, the head chef of 3 roads from Yashizaka. He's not easy to deal with. It seems that his mountain serpent cuisine has improved a lot compared to the last time we met. The younger generation will surpass us in time." Mr. Gua sighed at his own inferiority, like a dying old wave on the beach. If it weren't for the fact that this old man liked to use his peers to make steamed buns, others might have believed him. "I heard that it's mountain serpent cuisine. Is it from Ingzhou?" The burly tattooed chef demon rubbed his chin and asked in heavily accented Latin, "I've never seen it before. What's so special about it?" "Oh, Mr. Vladimir, are you pretending to be a newcomer to gather information again?" The tattooed chef demon smiled, honestly. "I really don't know. Is there any kind-hearted person who can explain it to me? Then we'll see." The hippie Aram didn't take the bait. He shrugged and said, "We'll meet him sooner or later in the competition." Among the many chef demons, Shun Jinqing, who inherited the mountain serpent cuisine from Ingzhou, was undoubtedly one of the most difficult to deal with. No matter who it was, They would definitely be at a disadvantage the first time they met him. It was an extremely dangerous technique, whether it was to others or to oneself. Even with the chef demon's ability to withstand it, he might die. Vladimir smiled slyly. He didn't care that his opponent was hiding anything, and started another topic. Then, what about the other one? I don't know her. Aram shook his head and stared at the back of the woman, called White Paper Moko, with a confused expression. According to the list that he knew, there should not be such a cooking demon in Ingzhou. There was no symbol, and he did not carry any tools. It was obvious that he had hidden his identity. But even if she was a powerful character, with such a beautiful appearance, she shouldn't be unknown. Could it be that he was a newcomer who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth and came to participate in the duel after getting his license plate? That would be too naive. Even though they were both cooking demons, there was a decisive and terrifying difference in their star levels. Rashly challenging an opponent who was far stronger than oneself would really cause trouble. What do you think, Mr. Gua? Aram cunningly threw the topic to the old man. That's amazing. Scary. I always feel like I can't compare. After keeping Ji Hao in suspense, old Chef Gua grinned, showing his white and sharp teeth. Such a young and beautiful chef. Even I have never heard of such a young and beautiful chef. Isn't that amazing? The people around him couldn't help but want to roll their eyes. No one said anything. In the silence, only old Chef Gua's nose twitched a few times, and the permanent smile on his face became subtle. Such an aura, it smelled like Mount Tingao, but other than that, there was a strange aura that he had never seen before, a bitter and moist air with the smell of plants, the coldness of bones, and the fragrance of children. Could it be the type that was similar to his Iya sect, or could it be that the teacher that he ate had another inheritance? In his throat, the wrinkled and loose skin suddenly swelled up, like a python swallowing an iron ball, swallowing his rapidly secreting saliva. He felt a strange hunger and thirst. It had been a long time since he was so full of appetite. It was the instinctive anticipation and hunger of a cooking demon. All of this kept telling him that there was something wrong with that woman. Staring at the name on the cooking table, Huaishe raised his head and looked at his opponent. It was as if he had been soaked in dirty water for who knew how long. That guy had a wet feeling. His long black hair clung to his face, and his smile was pale. He looked clean and capable, but there was always a pungent smell on him that couldn't be dispersed. It felt like something was rotten. While Huaishe was looking at his opponent was also looking at him. Oh, what a beautiful opponent. That's great. The middle-aged man stuck out his tongue and licked his dry lips, glancing at him with a faint smile, and Zhenshi, who was sitting in the audience seat behind him. Did you offend someone? Compared to the expressionless Huaishe, Zhenshi still didn't change her expression, but her eyes couldn't help but wander, showing a trace of uneasiness and guilt. Your employer seems to be a little unconfident, madam. Shen Jinqing laughed with a hoarse voice, putting the toolbox in his hand beside him. He raised his head and suggested, "Before we start, do you want to admit defeat, madam? To be honest, your face is so perfect that I'm tempted. I really don't want to destroy this beauty." Huaishe wanted to retort back, but he was limited by his disguise and couldn't open his mouth. Wait a minute. Are all of you living your life based on looks? Can't you walk when you see a woman? He could only roll his eyes to show his disdain. Oh, did I offend you? Shen Jinqing chuckled strangely. If that's the case, then there's no need to say more. For the sake of that delightful face, I won't let the pain last too long. Beside him, the toolbox was opened. The sound of steel rubbing against each other was heard, and a 2-inch-long knife was pulled out. Under the dim light, it revealed a colorful and terrifying pattern. The essence extracted from countless poisonous substances was finally created into a sharp weapon that could dissect and kill all living things. That guy, he took out his trump card at the beginning of the match. Aram, who was in the audience, was stunned. It's really as the legends say, a pervert who likes to get excited when his opponent is weak. That was the true skill of mountain granny's cooking. The dark side of the mountains, the fallen mountain god, the projection of the divinity that grew and nurtured all things in hell. Things that once grew and nurtured turned into cold and ferocious things. After careful brewing and creation, it formed a terrifying poison that even the culinary demon couldn't withstand. It was obviously delicious and irresistible, but after eating it, only despair and death were left. Once the utensils were picked up, the diner's life was already under the mountain granny's kitchen knife. There was no irreverence or arrogance. Even though Shen Jinqing spoke frivolously, he chose to go all out from the beginning. There was going to be a good show to watch now. So, are both sides ready? On the viewing platform that extended high up in the sky, behind the curtain, a coy voice that sounded like a castrate's pretentious posture sounded. As the High Emperor's envoy, the eunuch had white powder on his face. When he opened his mouth, the color of his teeth was pitch black. Everything here has been witnessed by the emperor. Both sides must not hide anything or slack off. Understood. No one responded, but this was something to be expected. That messenger didn't mind and waved his hand, indicating that Quan Jiang, who was kneeling beside him, would take care of the rest. Thus, the old warrior stood up and took a step forward. His hoarse voice turned into thunder, echoing in this huge underground space. Then, fair and square, let's decide the victor. In that instant, the resounding bells sounded again. Kakik. Very good, very good. Shen Jinqing laughed loudly, his slender fingers pressing on the kitchen table. The entire table suddenly shook, and countless tools flew out from the shelves. Then, with a shake of his shoulders in a sticky sound, for arms stretched out from behind him, catching the falling tools and slowly spreading them out. Just like the eight-legged spider, it was entrenched in his own domain. The ingredients in the water tank beside him had already fallen onto the chopping board. It was a ferocious pufferfish. It was located at the border of Kyoto, Yoshimi, Ryasaka. It was a famous chef's shop with a history of over 600 years. It was a special breed raised by 3 Roads, dragon pufferfish. It was 10 times, 100 times more delicious than ordinary pufferfish. At the same time, it was 10 million times more terrifying than a normal pufferfish. Its color was yellow and black, just like a flood dragon. The enormous pufferfish sinisterly twisted in the air, choosing its prey to swallow. But in the wake of Shen Jinqing's smooth movements, the multicolored short knife scattered, and the tiger pufferfish's slippery body was already cut open in the air. It didn't even have time to swell its body and release sharp spikes before its innards flowed out. Then he began to coldly dissect and slice it. But what was astonishing was that even though it had already been dissected into a skeleton, the pufferfish's mouth was still opening with difficulty. It was still alive. In order to maintain the peak of freshness and taste, 3 Roads was famous for this point in Hell's pufferfish cuisine. Even in the instant it was served on the table, all the way until the honored guest ate, it was still able to maintain its vitality, exploding the diner's taste buds like a bomb. As for whether it was poisonous or not, that depended on the chef's mood. However, if it was a cuisine, it definitely wouldn't be as simple as sashimi. As the inheritor of mountain serpent cuisine, and one of the head chefs of 3 Roads, Shen Jinqing wouldn't simply deliver this kind of unsightly natural poison to his opponent's table. In his hands, countless strange colored poisons had already been pulled out from the toolbox. They were processed smoothly like moving clouds and flowing water. Then they were thrown into the burning cauldron and began to boil the base of the thick soup. This was the essence of sashimi, handheld, tempura, hot pot mixed cooking, and the last white dessert after gathering all kinds of fierce poisons. Hell's killing dragon, iron cannon banquet. A vague shadow appeared behind him. It was like a river formed by amber wine, the unceasingly flowing poisonous water of the underworld on the Three Roads River. Resonating with the power from hell, this malice created by humans gave birth to the prototype of calamity. Just a sniff made Huaishir's appetite soar. In the Cage of Dreams, a group of crows began to caw loudly. They were already impatient, but compared to the opponent's all-out effort, Huaishir Suko was unusually lazy. Unhurriedly, she reached out and rummaged through the cabinet of the kitchen counter. She didn't even plan to use her own tools. Then she took out a mixing bottle. After weighing it for a while, she found it to be quite handy. Miss Suko's lips curled into a happy smile. This is it. Chapter 627. Just like that, they were dozens of meters apart. In front of Shinjin and under the gaze of all the cooking demons, Huaishir placed the wine mixing pot on the cooking table and poured in 200 milliliters of purified water. He turned around, opened the refrigerator, and took out 2 pieces of non-bubble ice cubes. He threw them into the pot and closed the lid. Then he was done. He didn't put anything else in. Accompanied by the dull sound of the ice cubes colliding, the wine mixing pot spun in Miss Susie's hand and flew up nimbly. After drawing an arc in the air, it fell again. It was like a tamed animal. The wine mixing pot jumped, rolled, and shook nimbly between Huaishir's arms and fingers. If it wasn't for the fact that it wasn't a magician's trick, people would almost think that there was an invisible rope tied to the pot in his hand, which was why he could make such astonishing and rich movements. It was dazzling. He didn't process the ingredients, nor did he light the stove. He didn't even use any tools. He just casually shook the wine mixing pot in his hand in the arena, as if he was going to make a cup of cappuccino for the aunties present. But cappuccino wasn't done like that. Moreover, everyone could clearly see that there was no coffee in the pot, not even a single soybean. It was as if he was joking. It was hard to understand. What is he doing? Juggling? Isn't he mixing drinks? Vladimir scratched his chin and said in confusion, "There are also cooking demons who focus on drinks, right? It doesn't seem to be something rare." Yerim, who was dressed like a hippie, couldn't help but roll his eyes. Mixing drinks? This was called mixing drinks. He could bet that as long as there was a gram of alcohol in the bottle, he would eat the bottle with cephalosporin today. This was purely ice water, right? Roar, pleasing the eyes is also a part of the culinary performance. Old cooking demon was still maintained the appearance of someone with late-stage Alzheimer's disease. He looked very, very powerful, which made people extremely angry. However, in his eyes, which were covered in gray spots and white shadows, his pupils contracted slightly, and an obscure electric light flashed through. Aura inspection method, searching for dragons and breaking acupoints. The origin substance technique used to measure the aura of the earth was used in his eyes. In that instant, he keenly sensed that something was wrong. What was that? In Huaishir's hand, there was a strange fluctuation hidden in the flask, like an obscure whirlpool. It rotated silently without spreading any heat. Instead, it extracted all the heat and poured it into the whirlpool. It caused the temperature of the entire underground space to drop slightly, but not many people were able to notice this subtle change. It was precisely at that moment that the steel arm under Huaishir's long-sleeve gloves silently cracked open. The furnace in the darkness lit up with fine sparks. The cooking had begun. For more than half an hour, Huaishir was casually shaking the flask in his hand. Other than that, he did nothing else. It was as if he had completely given up on the competition. He looked like he had given up. In other directions, the gazes of others were becoming more and more mocking. Maki fidgeted in her chair and clenched her fists as she stared at the man's back. Although they didn't know what was going on, it seemed like the current situation was overwhelmingly unfavorable for them. But as long as she saw Miss Weischer's calm expression, she inexplicably felt a trace of confidence. The situation wasn't that bad. There was still room for them to turn the tables. Very quickly, she smelled the scent that was gradually spreading through the air. Or rather, at this point, no one could ignore the scent that was brewing in the air, and the fragmented, boiling scent that gradually reverberated in their ears. It was the sound of countless bubbles rising and spreading in the clay pot, bringing with them the unique flavor of thick soup. They rose from the boiling cauldron, creating ripples and waves in the rich, milky white soup, rippling between the mushrooms and the vegetables. When they came into contact with the air, the thick fragrance contained within the bubbles would instantly explode, merging with the wind and flying in all directions. It was like a volcano that was about to erupt, unstoppable. The frightening sweetness in the pot constantly seeped out of the cracks in the lid, turning into wisps of hot steam that lingered at the tip of everyone's nose, bringing with it an undisguised and frightening temptation. The moment they smelled the fragrance, they already had the so-called awareness. Even if it was hell in front of them, they still wanted to explore it, wanted to try that kind of delicious taste, even if that extreme and excessive freshness would devour them. The crisp sound of the kitchen bell rang from Shen Jinqing's hand. The cooking was over. As the shadow of the underworld dissipated, the eyes of the skinny middle-aged man lit up with a strange flame. He looked at the opponent in front of him with a ferocious smile. "Can we begin, Miss Weischer?" The sound of splashing water came to an abrupt end. The mixing jug fell on the table. Like a dice cup, everything was settled. Weischer raised his eyes and stared at the cooking table in front of Shen Jinqing. A white-hot mist shrouded everything, hiding the ferocious claws and teeth. But the tempting fragrance wafted in the air, beating the hunger and restlessness in his stomach. He couldn't wait. She turned around and washed her hands at the sink. Miss Weischer pulled out a chair and sat in front of the table, finally showing a smile of anticipation. She waited quietly. The banquet of death, named Iron Cannon, began. It's rare to meet such a beautiful guest. It makes people excited. Shen Jinqing walked in with a smile and put on the first dish. Today is a full set of Iron Cannon banquet, using the most delicious parts of 3 pufferfish. The portion is a little big. If you can't eat it, don't force yourself. But I believe that Miss Weischer will definitely not refuse such a generous offer. It was like a blooming peony. Rows upon rows of glittering and translucent sashimi were arranged neatly between the plates that were adorned with various bright-colored lettuce. The pure white colors converged and overlapped in one place like a flourishing flower, exuding a refreshing and sweet fragrance. When the chopsticks picked up, each extremely thin and flexible piece of fish reflected the light and glowed faintly. He didn't know how many times he had practiced and how much effort and time he had poured into it to create the small piece in Weischer's hand. The texture was perfectly cut, maintaining the same shape and uniform flavor of each piece. And the small piece of sashimi was so pleasing to the eye. It was really amazing. It was just that it was only sashimi. There was no such thing as orange vinegar, radish puree, and white onion. The pufferfish in our restaurant doesn't need the assistance of other sundries. As long as you taste it, you will understand that unnecessary foreign objects will only tarnish this precious taste. Shen Jinqing raised his head and declared confidently. Weischer opened his mouth and swallowed a piece of sashimi. It was as if a delicious bomb had been detonated in an instant. When the elastic texture of the fish was chewed by his teeth, the fresh and sweet juice burst out from the gaps between his teeth, teasing the taste buds on his tongue and breaking out the unique sweetness of the fish and the terrifying freshness that was difficult for ordinary things to reach. It was extremely simple without any makeup or fancy. Although there was no time to mature it, the taste was still not inferior to any other of the same kind. Indeed, as Fujin had said, all external things would only dull the freshness of the dish. Only by tasting it would one be able to deeply experience the vitality that had long seeped into every cell of the body. The more he chewed, the deeper he could feel the sweetness lingering around the tip of his tongue. But then it became emptier. Before he swallowed the last piece of fish, Huaishir had already picked up the next piece of sashimi. He couldn't wait to open his mouth. As early as the moment he took the first bite, Huaishir had already understood something. This pure, natural freshness was indeed a field that he could not reach now. The previous chefs of Three-Way Restaurant had studied for many years, cultivated many generations of fish, and improved many processes to deduce the flavor of the pufferfish to the extreme. How could an outsider like him easily enter the field? 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces. When the gurgling freshness turned into a mellow and rich flavor, Huaishir was already intoxicated and could not stop. That's right, that's it. Shen Jinqing grinned and smiled, and the flames in his eyes danced. This was the unshakable confidence of Chef Three-Way Restaurant. No matter how picky a diner was, once they took the first bite, they would be captured by this natural demonic nature without exception. Then, step by step, they would walk into the abyss, and there would be no turning back. Oh no! In the audience, old cooking demon Gwen narrowed his eyes and chuckled strangely. He actually stepped into the trap without any precautions? Did he have confidence in himself, or was he completely ignorant? Even as a veteran monster-level cooking demon, he was still afraid of Three-Way Restaurant's Iron Cannon Banquet. That was a terrifying bewitchment that led people step by step into a desperate situation. Once indulged for the first time, it would be out of control. When Huaishir's movements finally stopped, he realized that the plate of sashimi in front of him was already empty. The freshest and sweetest part of the whole Dragon River pufferfish had been completely eaten by him. However, he didn't feel full at all. Instead, he became more and more hungry and thirsty, wanting more. He didn't have to wait long. Then, the second dish was served. Fishbone tempura, please. Shen Jinqing smiled and put down another wine cup. Please taste it together with the fish fin wine. Kang 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 kang. Kang 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 kang. When the chopsticks put the tempura into his mouth, there was a crisp sound. In the silence, it was so clear and penetrating. Crack! The crispy explosive broke between his teeth. After being fried by the grease, the wonderful fragrance in the heat was covered in a bright coat. Accompanied by the crisp sound, it danced on the tip of his teeth. It was a taste completely different from the freshness of the fish. After a simple processing, the wonderful taste contained in the fish bones flowed from the tip of the tongue into the stomach, along with the crispy texture. Without any prompting, Huaishir picked up the wine cup beside him and drank the sake in one gulp. In an instant, the sake surging with the fragrance of the fish fin flowed into his throat and mixed with the aftertaste of the fish bones. It was ignited. A heat wave hit his face, and his long hair danced in the air. He felt his whole body being completely surrounded by this hearty heat. Then, he held the fish liver in his hand. The mellow fish liver melted in his mouth and seeped into his soul, turning into a taste that was even better than sashimi and above common sense. He chewed crazily, almost unable to stop. The moment the pufferfish pot was finally served on the table, finally, the dagger was revealed. Chapter 628. The current Huaishir was completely captivated by this deliciousness. When the lid of the casserole was lifted in front of him, it was as if a mighty torrent was gushing out from within, turning into a shadow that stretched its neck and screamed. In the middle of the milky white boiling soup, the cooked tofu had a jade-like luster, and the green vegetables and mushrooms rose and fell in the thick soup, revealing an incomparable temptation. Even more shocking was the strange fragrance that was enough to drown a person. Suffocating, completely unable to breathe, forgetting to breathe. Huaishir's appetite could no longer be stopped by anything. Every cell, every strand of origin substance exuded a strong thirst. Countless crows crazily screeched in the bone-burying sanctuary, their insatiable thirst burning. He could no longer feel the existence of his body. At this moment, the only thing that remained was an instinctive desire to eat. He wanted to devour. He wanted more. Even if what he swallowed was a vicious poison that could kill him, he would not hesitate. "Please, Miss Huaiji, this is your fate." Shen Jinqing smiled and presented a bowl of thick soup, placing it in front of Huaishir. The tender white fish rose and fell in the soup, and the thick soup rippled with specks of starry light. Between the mushrooms and vegetables, the bouncing tofu reflected a sparkling light. Without any hesitation, Miss Huaiji picked up the soup bowl, opened her mouth, and almost went berserk. Wisps of green rose from her neck, climbing up her face bit by bit, interweaving into a sinister spider web. This caused the beautiful face that was intoxicated by the gluttony to become incomparably sinister. An endless stream of origin substance began to rise from the slender figure, corroding everything around it and dyeing it a strange, deep purple. That was poison. That's right, with the pufferfish as the foundation. After fusing with the blood of countless people, it evolved into the abyss poison. This was the most precious part of the dragon pufferfish. It had a noble status that was close to that of the master of the river. If one traced its roots, it could even inherit the noble dragon bloodline. Even though there were no more true dragons in the world, the demonic nature of the abominable flood dragon was becoming more and more violent under the abyss cooking demon's mediation. With this as the foundation, the innate poison of the pufferfish and countless acquired poisons were fused together, making the dish seem as if it had given birth to life. They were granted the embryonic form of a soul, forming a calamity that was not inferior to any abyssal creation. As Huaishir ate, bit by bit, it accumulated in his body until the moment it exploded, and everything was already irreversible. Countless toxins fused together and seeped into his soul, contaminating it from the inside out and causing an irreversible change to his origin substance. The combination of Shangrong cuisine and the secret of the three roads was the supreme masterpiece completed by Fujin Kei. No one could resist the temptation of Tao Tai. No one could resist the solidifying disaster, and no one could dispel the terrifying curse. Demonic poison. The great general of the three roads praised it as the essence of malice that could enter the sixth heaven in his lifetime. Just a trace of the poison leaked out of Huaishir's body, causing the bricks under his feet to begin to decay. An irresistible aura of decay spread out, enveloping the slender figure within. After the poison entered his soul, the demonic nature created by it began to erupt. The attendants at the side of the arena retreated in horror. They were only slightly affected by the poison, and they saw their own limbs begin to rapidly decay, deform, and twist into strange shapes. They didn't even have the chance to scream. They melted and turned into viscous blood that flowed. The fierceness of this highly toxic poison moved even the spectating cooking demons. They felt a deep sense of fear from the bottom of their hearts. Fujin K grinned. That's right, fear. From the moment of the opening match, this shadow had been planted in his heart and soul. In every subsequent match, he would exhaust all his mental and physical strength to guard against it. But guarding against it would be useless. The rules of the showdown between cooking demons innately placed him in the most advantageous position. No matter how much he guarded against it, when he entered his own domain step by step, he would no longer be able to resist the attraction of the demonic nature. If he did not hesitate to die to eat the pufferfish, then this deliciousness that surpassed ordinary pufferfish would bring about a terrifying outcome that was thousands of times more tragic than death. The premise was if the poison could really work. At this moment, Fujin K finally felt that something was wrong. When the soup in the bowl was finished in one gulp, what he heard was not a terrified scream, but an excited sigh and moan. Then, the empty soup bowl was thrown to the ground. It was not a pity. Thirst, a thirst that had been detonated. Countless iron crows were crazily restless at this moment, continuously transmitting their thirst to Huaishur. They were thirsting for food, thirsting for more. Huaishur snatched the spoon from Fujin K's hand. Then, he picked up the boiling hot earthenware pot and placed it in front of him. In the fragrant and rich soup, a pair of scarlet eyes were reflected. They were filled with anticipation and joy. Impatiently, he lifted the spoon and scooped up a full spoonful of the mushrooms, fish, and soup. He poured it into his open mouth. The sound of chewing that made one's scalp numb rang out. Just like that, he swallowed the boiling soup into his stomach, along with the thousands of times more violent poison, without leaving a single drop outside. He allowed the demonic nature to surge in his soul and allowed the changing poison to corrode his body. Let go of the Taotai. Fujin K was stunned on the spot, frozen, and his smile gradually shattered because at this moment, what rose in Fujin K's body was no longer the changing poison that he was proud of, but a dreamlike light. It was so beautiful that it was intoxicating, but it was also fleeting as if it did not exist in this world. Her existence had turned into a bubble, shattering with a touch. But from that pair of eyes, a blazing light that could steal one's soul was emitted. 1,000 beautiful dreams and 1,000 nightmares overlapped. And at this moment, they were shattered. The despair, terror, pain, and once abundant happiness that surged within spread together, soaring into the sky, forming a violent vortex. No matter how the demonic poison changed, it could not break free from that terrifying gravitational force. Along with the food, it was cruelly chewed, swallowed, and fell into her stomach, becoming a part of her, an insignificant nourishment for that terrifying dream. That was indeed a vicious poison that was created with meticulous planning and painstaking effort, a demonic cooking that Huaishur admired and was incomparably intoxicated. But at this moment, in front of him, it was food, resources, something necessary for growth. It was a stepping stone for the growth of the crows. It was really delicious. If possible, Huaishur wanted to cheer, to loudly praise, to acknowledge Fujin K's outstanding talent and skill, as expected of the mountain maiden's cooking, as expected of the 3 roads. He could not stop at all. Huaishur was intoxicated in this moment of enjoyment, so moved that he almost shed tears. The delicious disaster rolled in his mouth, chewed, swallowed, and was immediately absorbed by his soul, transforming into the pure essence of the abyss, nourishing countless hungry crows. This joy of growth was really too wonderful, but not long after, this heartfelt joy suddenly came to an abrupt end. Huaishur's movements paused. He lowered his head from ecstasy, falling into a daze. In front of him, the earthenware pot was already empty. The cups and plates were in a mess, and there was nothing left. The Iron Cannon banquet was over. It was over. Huaisha raised his head and looked at the demonic cooking in front of him in confusion, full of confusion and doubt. The first thing he felt was regret, then disappointment, and finally anger. Indescribable anger. It was over just like that. What on earth was going on? Wasn't this just the beginning? He was not full yet. No, it should be said that his appetite had just arrived, and it was already gone. Was it only this much? Was this a joke, compared to the magnificent despair he had seen before, which was like a surging sea of darkness? This was just a cup of sugar water with a little more exquisite seasoning. Just this. Just this. Just this. In the dead silence, Shun Jinqing's expression twitched, and he could not help but stagger back a step. His face was pale. He was clearly such a beautiful and coquettish beauty, but he could no longer feel any beauty and carefree, being looked at by that pair of eyes. He felt fear from the bottom of his heart. It was as if a ferocious behemoth was slowly rising in front of his eyes. A huge and dark shadow spread out, covering and swallowing him. The beautiful disguise was torn apart, revealing the terrifying essence. It was an immeasurable abyss, a vortex of gluttony that he could never satisfy with his insignificant skills. Only a pair of ferocious eyes looked down at him, full of disappointment and disdain. More. An angry roar rang out from his soul, a roar of rage. Trash, give me more. But there was nothing more. Shun Jinqing's all-out iron cannon banquet, the demonic poison that he was so proud of, was completely defeated by this pair of eyes that seemed to come from the abyss. What was even more painful and despairing was the cooking demon's self-restraint and integrity. The culinary demon, who was willing to step into the abyss for the sake of the ultimate cuisine, was actually unable to satisfy the needs of his customers. He couldn't even fill their stomachs. Even after trying his best, he was only able to make her appetizer. There was nothing more despairing and painful for a chef than this. Even the century-old reputation of the Three Roads would be shamed because of this. How could this be? From this moment on, Shun Jinqing's last bit of fighting spirit completely disappeared. He lay limp on the ground, unable to move. Soon, Huaisha woke up from his thirst and regained his composure. After wiping his mouth, he regretfully looked at the empty bowl in front of him. Although he was disappointed, he maintained his respect for his opponent and his appreciation of this delicious dish. He put his palms together and expressed his gratitude. Next, it was his turn. Waving his hand, he motioned for the frightened attendants to come forward and clean up the table. Then, he first took out a wide-mouthed wine cup that he had prepared beforehand, put an ice cube in it, opened the wine flask that had been placed there for a long time, and poured the ice water into the cup. Finally, he picked up the spoon and casually tapped the cup's rim. The fine vibration broke the original balance, and the chill sealed in the ice water spread out, causing a thin layer of frost to hang on the cup. Thus, it was a success. Huaisha gestured to the dazed Shun Jinqing in front of him. "Please, Your Excellency Shun Jinqing." With such an expectant smile, Motoko Huaisha finally revealed the joy and ferocity of a predator. "Now, it's your turn to comment on my work." Chapter 6:29. Inside the glass, the surface of the water was still swaying slightly, reflecting a faint glow. Everyone couldn't help but stretch their necks forward to take a closer look. They frowned. "What's this? Water? Nonsense! Anyone with eyes can see that it's water. But what's this thing doing?" A cooking demon from Ingzhou pinched his chin and thought for a long time. "It looks like it's cut with water. Good technique, clean and neat. Cut with water." Originally, the popular drinking method in Ingzhou was to add water to reduce the alcohol content so that people could taste the wine better. At first, it was used on sake. Later, when foreign liquors like whiskey entered the market, it quickly became popular. After adding ice and water, mix it well until there's frost on the glass. It's cut with water. Nonsense! Who here couldn't see that it was cut with water? But the problem was, what did you cut? Cut with water to cut sake and whiskey? What kind of new type of matryoshka doll was this? Moreover, in the glass, it should be pure water, right? No carbon dioxide was added, so where did all the bubbles come from? It doesn't feel good. Aram was hesitant, so he turned and asked, "Old Mr. Gua, what do you think?" "Oh, I know a thing or two about this." Old Chef Gua smiled like an old chrysanthemum, rubbing his knees. After a long time, he said, "This should be the famous Doomsday dish, boiled cabbage." For a moment, countless question marks appeared on everyone's heads. What the hell? Boiled cabbage? Is there a problem with me or with you? Do you Doomsday people like to talk about this whenever you're cooking? How can there be such boiled cabbage? Maybe it's a subspecies. Old Chef nodded calmly. Cooking has to be innovative. Don't joke around. If it's boiled cabbage, then where's the boiled water? Old Chef Gua shrugged. It's been too long. It's cold. Then where's the cabbage? Maybe you forgot to put it in? The old man had an unfathomable and terrifying look on his face, causing the others to be too lazy to continue listening to his nonsense. Because Weisher had already picked up the sticky note on the side, wrote a note, and stuck it on the cup. He thoughtfully wrote the introduction. Creative cuisine. Heartache. This was a brand new result that he had come up with on a whim. After combining the skills of the creator, it was a completely reborn fat otaku sad water V3. 0. After that, Miss Huai Ji smiled and pointed at the cup, looking at Shun Jinqing, eagerly anticipating. Please, my friend. Choo choo, choo choo. Shun Jinqing, on the other hand, was silent. He sat on the chair, dumbstruck. He seemed to have finally awoken from his previous shock. Staring at the cup in front of him, his expression changed and gradually twitched. He suppressed his anger. However, the rage that was growing stronger and stronger was difficult to restrain, causing his eyes to widen and his face to turn ashen. Stop joking around. Huaiji? Shun Jinqing angrily rebuked. What do you take cooking for? Was this a joke? For this kind of thing, even if I die here and jump down from here, I will never. His angry voice came to an abrupt end, because there was a thick shadow covering his face, blocking the light in his eyes. From a close distance, Huai Ji Motoko lowered her head and looked down at the opponent in front of her. She didn't speak, just silently stared. But when he was looked down at by that pair of pitch-black eyes, there was no doubt that he felt the pressure from it. That was telling him, drink it. She was warning him. It was as if she wanted to implant that inexplicable brutality into the soul in front of her. She coldly gave an absolute order to the ingredients on the chopping board that could not be disobeyed. There was no need for words. That indifferent and mocking meaning had been deeply engraved in his soul. She whispered in his ear, Shun Jinqing, you are already a mature adult. Don't be picky like a child, okay? If you want to make trouble because you can't eat the candy, then I will give you some sweetness in front of him. Huaiji Motoko pulled over the seasoning plate, opened the lid, and casually and perfunctorily pinched a pinch of candy and threw it into the cup in front of her. It was as if this would make the ice water taste better. This was the last mercy. Now, she raised her eyes again, bent down, and got closer to him. She stared into his eyes at a close distance and gave him her final order. Drink it for me. Being stared at by that pair of eyes, he felt as if he had fallen into an abyss and lost his last will to resist. He couldn't help but reach out and pick up the cup. By the time Shun Jinqing reacted, his lips were already pressed against the edge of the cold cup. He tilted it, and a stream of cold water flowed into his mouth. It went down his throat, and the refreshing coolness spread. He couldn't help but let out a long breath. He felt refreshed, Unexpectedly, it was sweet and tasty. No, it should be said that it refreshed his mind. The coarse sugar that had been casually grabbed spread through his chest along with the coldness of the ice water. It was as if he was standing in front of a cold wind, as if he could see the withering plum blossoms of early spring wither on the branches. Stooped and humble, his eyes gradually became hazy. There was clearly no alcohol, but he felt as if he was drunk. He was intoxicated by this wonderful origin substance and recalled that winter. In that instant, he felt that something was wrong. His pupils subconsciously contracted, and he wanted to resist. But immediately afterwards, an illusion appeared in front of him. That year, snow fell from the sky, and a young girl stood alone on a plum blossom tree. The fluttering snow landed on her hair and shoulders, gradually covering the small mole on the back of her neck. It could no longer be seen, and only her snow-white skin remained. When she turned around to look at him, her eyes were like ink, and the youth's heart began to beat wildly. Very quickly, that illusion disappeared in front of his eyes. "Ah, Tao," he muttered absent-mindedly, falling into a trance. After that, how many years had it been since he remembered her appearance? Even he himself had forgotten those buried memories. Now, when the after-images of the past reappeared, he once again felt intoxicated amidst his confusion. He couldn't help but take another sip. By the time he realized that it was poison, it was already too late, because the remaining sweetness in his mouth gradually became sour. In the midst of his confusion, he gradually recalled that short and painful youth that belonged to him and only him. "Ah, Tao, that's the headmaster's daughter. How is it? She's a beauty, right? I'm so envious. Why can't I have a daughter like that? You brat, you're not in heat, are you? Hurry up and get back to work. Don't let your imagination run wild." The work of the 3 roads was very busy, especially the apprentices. Not only did they have to do odd jobs, but they also had to serve tea and be responsible for running errands for their masters and seniors. Like servants, they were busy every day until dusk. The slightest mistake would be mercilessly whipped and reprimanded. Many of his companions in the same batch couldn't stand such cruel treatment and quit. Only he persisted. He gritted his teeth, held back his tears, and didn't know how many sleepless nights. Finally, he endured the most difficult years. In the end, he received the favor of the headmaster and was accepted as an official disciple. It wasn't until that day, when he saw Tao again at the banquet, that he vaguely understood. Perhaps he was able to endure that long torment, not because of his innate character or perseverance, but because he wanted to see her again. The interaction between the two of them was just that, the meeting under the corridor, the smile they saw every day at dawn and dusk, and the fragrance that remained in the air when they brushed past each other. It made him gradually intoxicated, and gradually he couldn't extricate himself. His mind was occupied by that figure. He missed her face, her back, and her body crazily. He did so many shameful things just to get closer to her, even if it was just a little bit. He was like a loyal dog. As long as it was Atao's words, he would listen. As long as it was something she wanted, he would buy it. As long as it was something she wanted to do, he would do it no matter what. Until one day, he saw someone else holding her in his arms. How long ago was that scene? Why was it still so vivid in his mind? Every time he thought of it, he couldn't help but feel a dull pain in his heart. He couldn't breathe. He lowered his head and subconsciously loosened his bow tie. He picked up the glass of water and drank a mouthful, trying to use the ice water to suppress the frustration in his heart. The excessive sugar spread and mixed with the sour taste, leaving only an indescribable bitterness. Jealousy. This was the taste of jealousy. When she was with that person, Tao actually showed a beautiful smile that he had never seen before. It was like the sun deeply piercing Shun Jin's heart, making him almost go crazy. If only she could be happy. As long as she lived well, it didn't matter what happened to him. He could only comfort himself with such a reason. He curled up in a corner where the sun couldn't find it, gradually becoming as humble as dust. But happiness didn't come. After she got pregnant with that person's child, Atao was dumped by that scumbag. She became completely different from the past. Not long after, she was in a pair with a new boyfriend. Her smile was still the same, but gradually it was different from the past. Then she was betrayed and abandoned again and again. It was all the fault of that group of bastards. Every time after they broke up, Atao would cry and complain to him. Every time he wanted to muster up the courage to say the words in his heart, perhaps the next one could be him. At that time, he would never let her be hurt like that. Countless times, Shun Jin made such a vow. It wasn't until late one night that a rosy face with a faint smell of alcohol came over and scrutinized his face, her eyes roaming. "Oh, I know." She smiled. "Shun Jin Kuan, you must not have hugged a woman before, right?" She whispered in his ear, "As long as you have tasted that feeling once, you won't be so embarrassed. How about it? Do you want me to help? Take it as a reward for all this time." Crack! In Shun Jinqing's hand, a crack appeared on the glass. That was the sound of a dream breaking. Shun Jinqing had forgotten how he answered at that time. He only remembered that he lowered his head, shamefully and embarrassedly escaped. He wanted to escape to a place where even the shadow couldn't catch up. He wanted to forget everything. From then on, it was a long and empty time. On the field, Shun Jinqing had long been immersed in the bubbles of the dream, throwing everything to the back of his mind. He just swallowed the bitterness in the glass in big mouthfuls. Unknowingly, tears streamed down his face. Why did it become like this? Since when did everything become different? He had never noticed it. But what about her? Did she really know his feelings? In the silence, tears gradually fell into the glass, wetting his palm drop by drop. Then they quickly evaporated. It was as if he wasn't holding a glass of water, but a red-hot iron. In the terrifying heat, his hand gradually burned into charcoal, making a sizzling sound. That was the heat hidden in the wine glass finally erupting. As the ice water decreased, it began to spread. Clearly, as long as he let go, he would be free, but Shun Jinqing was reluctant to let go. He just shed tears and sipped the boiling bitter wine in a daze. He just wanted to see that illusion again. Once again, he wanted to return to the first time he saw her under the plum blossoms. He stared at the girl bathed in snow and told her what he had always wanted to say. "Miss Atao, I love you from the bottom of my heart." He said such words from his cracked heart in such a humble way. But no one responded. Shun Jinqing closed his eyes and fainted. But even as he fainted, he continued to cry and gripped the glass of water tightly. Even if the rescuers used iron pliers, it would be difficult to pry it open. To the side, Huaishur was dumbfounded. It had to be said that this was the result of the inspiration he had obtained from observing a certain person. He had used the corrosive origin substance in the dream cage as the material to transform all kinds of emotions and reforge it. The water was just water. The only thing that had merged with it was an insignificant bubble seed. With the illusion of joy as the starting point, it gradually fell under the guidance of the ashes until it was unable to extricate itself from the pain of despair. This was the watercutter dream. Unfortunately, dream manipulation was not Huaishur's forte, so she could only rely on the buffs from the decaying dream fragment and the forger's forge. Not only could it not be stored for a long time, but it also took an astonishingly long time to create. Limited by his skill, it had to be swallowed by the other party before it could germinate. It would grow along the other party's soul and bring the greatest pain. This was a poison coated with a layer of sugar. Compared to that kind of nightmare, the high temperature of the glass was just an addition. It could only be said that he had taken advantage of the cooking demon tournament. He could not imagine what Shin Jin-ching had seen, nor could he empathize with him. However, he could more or less guess from his external performance. Then, he felt admiration from the bottom of his heart. After all, a bootlicker was a real cow. Not long after, the result was clear. Shin Jin-ching was judged to be unable to rise again, losing the ability to continue the tournament. It was unknown if he would wake up in a short period of time. Under the astonished gazes of the crowd, Miss Huaisher grinned and left with her employer. The opening match of the Cooking Demon Tournament. Huaisher Susie victory. Even now, many of the cooking demons in the audience still hadn't recovered from the shock. Some people already had guesses in their hearts, but they would not say it out loud. On one hand, they did not have much confidence. On the other hand, they hoped that others would also suffer a loss when they met her. After all, that Miss Susie was a real strong opponent. There was no doubt about that. They could not think that Shin Jin-ching was a simple character, just because of his sudden defeat. After all, with the reputation of 3 roads, no one in the audience could guarantee that they would be fine after eating an entire set of iron cannon feast. If they wanted to win, they had to gain the initiative by striking first. According to the rules of the tournament, the cooking demon who finished first could let the opponent eat his dish first, and then try to KO. It was not like that strange woman who ate all the mutation poison without dissolving it. Moreover, she felt that it was not enough and wanted more. It could only be said that Shin Jin-ching was too pitiful. He was clearly a candidate who had the potential to enter the finals, but in the end, he met the worst opponent. No matter who it was, everyone could see that the woman called Susie had an excessively high resistance to poison. Apart from that, only old cooking demon Gua had some understanding of the upgraded version of the fat otaku's sorrowful water. He was really too old. He had seen too much and experienced too much. No matter what kind of technique it was, he had experienced it from his opponent. If he guessed correctly, it should be a technique similar to the Feng Xian Dao. No, it should be a cooking method similar to the offering banquet. It originated from the cooking demon tradition in India. It was a unique cooking technique created by imitating the disaster of heavenly demons disturbing Buddha's enlightenment. It seemed simple, and the ingredients used were not that amazing. However, the method of using the origin substance was frighteningly powerful. No matter how profound a monk's meditation was, as long as a bowl of milk porridge entered his stomach, he would still be entangled by the original sinful nature of birth, old age, sickness, and death, resentment, unattainable desires, blazing yin, and so on. If it weren't for the fact that the woman called White Paper Susie wasn't wearing a monk's robe during the cooking demon duel, he would have thought that she was the white lotus seed of this generation. After all, the cooking demon's signature style was to look safe and harmless. The women looked as pure as they could be, while the men looked as herbivorous as they could be. Their disguises were better than anyone else's, but their attacks were more vicious than anyone else's. Losing to such an opponent, Shin Jin-ching was not aggrieved. From the beginning, he had fallen into the opponent's rhythm. Then, the flaw in his heart had been seen through, and he had been strengthened with special attacks. His complete collapse was completely within reason. As early as when White Paper Susie finished eating the iron cannon banquet, he had already lost half of the battle. Ho ho, the younger generation will surpass us in time. The younger generation will surpass us in time. The old cooking demon laughed with gratification, clapping his hands in encouragement. Like a benevolent senior, he praised, "Truly, truly terrifying." As such, he restrained the surging appetite and killing intent in his heart. He narrowed his eyes, keeping the second half of his sentence in his heart. This child, he definitely could not be left alive. Chapter 630. Late at night, in the independent courtyard of the Rakimi family manor, in the overly spacious bedroom, the darkness of the bone burial sanctuary rose, isolating the inside from the outside. Huaishir sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the figure opposite him. They looked at each other, deep in thought. After removing the disguise left by Tangi, he had returned to his former state and felt a long-lost carefree feeling. At the same time, the effort he had put in these days had finally paid off. He was not referring to the crows who had eaten so much, but still felt that it was not enough, but himself. And in front of him was the result he had obtained these days. The afterimage of young Master Ming. No, it was no longer an afterimage. It was more like another version of himself. It was as if there was an invisible mirror in front of him, reflecting his image in it. However, the reflections were not exactly the same. Apart from their faces being similar when placed next to each other, they were completely different in terms of gender and temperament. This was a completely different reversal. More accurately, it should be called Miss Huaihai Motoko. Thanks to Huaishir's abundant and luxurious preparations when he advanced, the bone burial sanctuary was qualitatively different from the other young Master Ming, and even the afterimage it created had considerable potential. Not only was it used to confuse the opponent's line of sight, but it also had the characteristic of being able to carry origin substance. It was because of this, under Tangi's processing, that this special afterimage could grow to such a degree. And today, she finally transformed into Huaihai Motoko's face, achieving a breakthrough from nothing. From this, it could be seen that Huaishir's duel on the field had a considerable impact on the entire Nara. Otherwise, the essentially illusory Miss Huaihai Motoko would not have been able to make such progress from this urban legend. Today's afterimage. No, today's Huaihai Motoko was already in existence similar to Huaishir's reflection. Now, following Huaishir's movements, Miss Huaihai Motoko, who was opposite him, also made the same reaction. Whether it was raising her hand, stomping her foot, or turning around, everything was perfectly reflected. Even if Huaishir improvised a performance, there was no mistake in her response. After completing such a difficult move, he even winked proudly. After a long time, Huaishir finally reacted, and his hair stood on end. Because he didn't even blink just now. Something was wrong. However, this kind of abnormality was normal. Huaishir felt that something was wrong with her reflection. Miss Huaishimizu. The worse it was, the better it was for Huaishir. This was one of the prerequisites he had prepared for Great Si Ming. She was a person of nothingness named Huaiji Suzi. A false identity, a person who didn't exist in the first place, or in other words, an existence that could replace his fate. If one were to call it a second primordial spirit or external incarnation, there would be no difference. It was just that Huaishir did not cultivate immortality, nor did he have a flying sword. If he wanted to become Great Si Ming, he needed a substitute. It was true that Great Si Ming and young Si Ming came from the same source, but whether it was in the legends or now, they were two completely different existences. Even if they were sacred marks, they were level 3 and level 4 respectively. This was because to merge the two into one was not something a level 3 sublimator could do. No matter how powerful or unreasonable a level 3 sublimator was, they could not do it. It was not because they lacked the ability, but because they were limited by their own weakness. Miracles and disasters were two sides of the same coin. The other side of the sacred mark was the abyss, and an excessively huge miracle would attract disasters. When young Si Ming transformed into Great Si Ming, not only did it bring about a huge increase in power, the gravity from hell would also increase. It was impossible for a level 3 sublimator that had just completed the ether transformation to resist such a terrifying pressure. The moment the transformation was completed, Huaishir was destined to be frozen and fall into hell. In the future, he could only date the fat otakus of the Golden Dawn. Therefore, to him, there were only 2 ways to become Great Si Ming. The first was to give up his original goal of becoming a level 4 Lord of the Clouds and cultivate his abyssal army. After completing the young Si Ming's destiny, he would obtain the perfect resistance to the level 4 sublimator and become a true Great Si Ming. This would also be considered as going through the official process, completing the transfer from the logistics department to the anti-revolutionaries department, and successfully changing his class. From then on, he would be a traitor who attacked his own people in the celestial genealogy. The second was to find a way to resist the gravity of hell, find a way to resist the erosion of the abyss, and then do it secretly. On the surface, I'm still working in the logistics department, but in reality, no one knows that I have a part-time job in the Lubyanka. Without a doubt, the latter would be more difficult. The existence of Lady Huaishir Suko was a preparation to deal with this problem. Since one person couldn't bear Great Si Ming's stigmata, 2 people would do, although 3 or 4 people would be better. In terms of cost effectiveness, 2 people was the easiest and most feasible way. More people would only increase the risk of losing control. Therefore, the existence of Huaishir Suko was born. If the plan went smoothly, she would be an extension of Huaishir's will when she entered the completed state. As a part of his body and soul, she would share the pressure from Great Si Ming and the backlash from the abyss with Huaishir. When necessary, she could be used as a substitute doll to throw all the backlash from the abyss over and cut off the connection. Since she was a tool, it did not matter even if she was frozen. Or rather, there would be more ways to play with her after she was frozen. Therefore, a tool was the most precious thing in the world. Usually, she could serve tea and water, massage his legs and feet. If something happened, she could solve it. If she could not solve it, she could even send the tool to her death. At crucial times, she could even face some curses, relic-level causality law attacks, and even the backlash from fate. No wonder so many people like to be a tool. Even Huaishir himself was starting to have no conscience. Anyway, even if it was another him, he did not have to be polite. Under Tangi's processing, there was a crucial qualitative change, and under Huaishir's guidance and deduction, there was a breakthrough from nothing to something. Now, Huaishir Suko, who existed as a reflection, was no longer a pure imagination. But if he wanted her to improve, he had to build up enough legends. It would be best if he could create some correction value or increase some distortion. This way, as an extension of young Si Ming, the identity of Huaishir Suko would become more and more real. In the end, the fake would become real, and she would become Huaishir's second body. What was even more pleasant was that her growth could also be counted as part of young Si Ming's destiny. Huaishir could eat 2 fish and kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Although he might lose both lives if he did not play it well, the risk was still within an acceptable range. He would just treat it as opening a SMUF account, therefore. When he was Huaishir Suko, he had to do more things. His long-term goal was to complete the transformation of Great Si Ming and prepare to advance. Now, his short-term goal was to do as much as possible, feed the crow as much as possible, and then earn as much money as possible to feed the other crow at home. Although the former was greedy, he would be able to feed it sooner or later. But if it was the latter, he felt that there was no hope for him in this life. It's not easy to be the head of a family. Huaishir looked up at the bright moon outside the window and sighed helplessly. In order to maintain the necessary dignity, there is no other choice but to make sacrifices. That's right. In order to prevent the present realm from being poisoned, it would be safer to use money to seal that black-hearted woman in the basement of his house. Just like that, with the satisfaction of successfully protecting the world today, Huaisher lay on the bed and fell into a deep sleep. Then, 2 hours later, he was woken up by a phone call. Huaisher sat up on the bed, lowered his head, and looked at the name of that stinky sister of Hu Po's on the phone. He pressed it expressionlessly, lay down, and continued to sleep. The phone rang again. He pressed it and blacklisted it. The phone rang for the third time. It was an unknown number. He helplessly picked up the phone and heard Hu Po's angry voice. "That's enough. Huaisher. Don't be like a child, okay? Big sister, I don't know what you mean. After all, I'm only 18. Huaisher rolled his eyes, calling and harassing a weak, helpless, and pitiful man in the middle of the night. "Do you know that I can already file a sexual harassment complaint against you?" "Just you?" Hu Po sneered. "Why don't we both report each other to the Astronomy Association for sexual harassment? Let's see who the administration will believe then." Huaisher widened his eyes and angrily rebuked with righteousness. "If you have something to say it. Woman, don't think about those unhealthy things in your head every day. As a teacher of the people in the ivory tower, even I can't stand it anymore." 15 minutes, Xingfu Temple. Hu Po was too lazy to argue with him anymore. After telling him the location, she hung up the phone. At the 16th minute, a leisurely Miss Huaiji appeared in front of Hu Po on a bicycle that she got out of nowhere. As expected, she saw an expressionless face. "Why are you so serious? Come, do you have something?" Huaisher raised his hand and handed over the Odin that he bought from the convenience store. "It tastes pretty good, but it's too bland. I added a little extra chili." After glaring at Huaisher for a long time, Hu Po took a deep breath and suppressed the urge to cut this stinky brother of hers with a knife. "Be serious. Leave the bike here and follow me." She let out a long breath and turned around to lead the way. "The murder scene is up ahead." Carrying the Odin, Huaisher passed through the cordon that was guarded outside. Finally, he saw a corpse on the road. It was too horrible to look at. The way of death looked very familiar. Huaisher squatted down and swallowed the meatball in his mouth. He studied the corpse on the ground and slowly raised his eyebrows. Decapitated. Chapter 631. In front of Huaisher was a corpse. To be exact, it was a corpse whose neck was mostly cut off. According to Huaisher's experience, the murder weapon should be a knife, and the culprit was quite skilled, like a butcher, calmly and skillfully using the simplest way to cut off the flexible muscles and hard bones, instantly breaking the neck of the deceased. The only flaw was that there was still a part of the flesh connected, which made it feel awkward. But no matter how he looked at it, it seemed deliberate, not beheading, but correcting the mistake. Huaisher held the Odin skewers in his hand and nibbled on them, lost in thought. The more he looked at the scene, the more familiar it was. The more he looked at it, the more he felt a sense of déjà vu. Even with his unruly knowledge of tracing, Huaisher could imagine how the murderer forced the victim into the alley step by step, and then cruelly ravaged the victim, leaving wounds all over the victim's body. Finally, when despair came, the murderer coldly and skillfully cut off the victim's head. Perfect! Wait, why did it feel like he was the one who did it? This was completely his traditional program. Huaisher instantly became alert. Someone wants to harm me. But soon he calmed down. First of all, only a few people knew that he came to Yingzhou in disguise as Huaisher Su. Although Russell had a bad taste, he wouldn't kill other people just to torment him. Tangi didn't need to be mentioned. She had hundreds of thousands of ways to deal with him, so there was no need to draw legs on a snake. As for weapons similar to murder weapons, Huaishur only had the royal god sword, hatred. Not many people knew about this. His two students, the manager of the alchemy laboratory, Mr. Ping, and Raymond, who he pulled over to test the sword, they wouldn't go around talking about this kind of thing. So the biggest suspect was, he turned around and looked at Hupa, his eyes becoming serious. "Stupid sister, what are you doing?" "It's not me." Hupa rolled her eyes and lit up the 7 stars at the corner of her mouth. "It's too easy for me to harm you. I just have to lift up your skirt in public. Besides, this kind of murder happened long before you came, so it's not related to you at all." "Then who is it? How would I know?" Hupa shrugged and glanced outside. "But that fellow has been getting more and more out of hand lately. Over there, just one more street, and that's the entrance to Nara City Hall. This is clearly a provocation. Anyway, as long as it didn't involve him." After Huaishur finished the last meatball, he threw the bamboo skewer into the container and casually tossed it into the trash can in the corner. Just like that, he finished his supper at the scene of the murder. In the end, he even took out a wet tissue to wipe his hands and mouth clean, causing Hupo's eyes to twitch wildly. Finally, his gaze fell on the head that was still filled with fear and despair. "Who was the one who died? He looks familiar." Huaishur thought for a long time, but couldn't remember. "An acquaintance? For the time being, he's one of my cousins. His name is—" "Forget it. You're too lazy to remember anyway. Since he's dead, you can call him whatever you want. Didn't you have a cooking demon duel with his agent last night?" Huaishur frowned. Shinjinqing? He finally remembered this unlucky brother of his. He remembered that he was still sitting on a chair and watching the show. Why did he appear here? Who knows? The cooking demon left the competition, so he lost the right to compete. He probably gave up on himself and came out to get drunk. I heard that there are many places to have fun nearby. Speaking of which, while your colleagues are working hard to make a living, you're actually sleeping. Don't you feel ashamed? Sorry, not at all. Instead, I was so happy that I ate an extra bowl of supper. Huaishur retorted mercilessly. Your cheap cousin is dead. Shouldn't you be happy? Why are you so serious? Or did you call me all the way here just to share this joy with me? That's where the problem lies. Hupa sighed faintly. An hour ago, your former colleague, Riken's former retainer, Sasaki Kayomesa, appeared at the scene of the crime. Huaishur froze on the spot. He slowly turned his head in disbelief. What? He asked in shock. Sasaki? He didn't come to meet us? We were in contact before, and he even wanted to join us. But unfortunately, when we were about to meet on the day we arrived in Nara, he stood us up and then disappeared. Hupa sighed. Although that guy is stupid and inflexible, and his head is full of untimely and stubborn thoughts, he still values keeping his promises. I thought that something happened to him, and he might be dead, but I didn't expect it to be worse than that. But even so, I don't believe that he would become a murderer. That idiot would rather die than be in such a sorry state. Hupa handed him the phone, and he saw the surveillance video of the intersection at that time. After a pause, she stared at the man who was hurrying in the night. There was only a back view. He was still wearing an Ingzhou-style robe, wooden clogs, and an ill-fitting long saber. On his head, he was wearing an extremely funny pink motorcycle helmet, as if he was trying to disguise himself, but it only made him more eye-catching. Only 2 short frames were shown, but it was enough to identify him. Because even if his head was covered with a helmet, that guy forgot to disguise his own sword. Whether or not he had seen it before, as long as he took the photo to the weapon craftsman to check, he could not hide his identity at all. It was too lame. Huaishur looked at the screenshot and shook his head. To be honest, I have never seen such a punk-style murderer. Hupa was silent for a long time. He glanced at the unconscious Jinling decapitation king next to him and finally felt the thickness of the skin on both sides. He sighed. Huaisheng also did not believe that Sasaki would be a headless murderer. What a joke! How could he not know Sasaki's decapitation skills? How could it be so good? Moreover, with his temper, if he really wanted to take revenge on society, he would have gone to Looming Hall with a bomb. Why would he need to do this? But it was clearly not his business, and he just ran straight into the murder scene. In fact, it was such a coincidence that he hit his tracks. No matter how he looked at it, he was a major suspect. How long has similar cases been appearing? Half a month, Hoopa said. This is also the reason why the Riken family did not announce Sasaki as the murderer now. He came here a week ago. The time does not match at all, but we can't rule out the suspicion of impersonation. It's been so long. Huaisheng was stunned. The local inspector in Nara did not take action? How useless is that? Hoopa asked, in Dongxia, will the Social Security Bureau hand over the security of Jinling to the Astronomy Society? Okay, Huaisheng thought for a long time and asked, is the Looming Hall in charge now? Looming Hall? At the critical juncture of the family head selection, they can't wait for the Riken family to make a fool of themselves. Everyone kicks a man who is down. At this time, everyone wants to step on him. Those guys only come to clean up the mess and pretend to apologize after they are done. Other than that, they don't care about anything else. Hoopa rolled his eyes. In order to prevent the Riken family's reputation from being damaged, the elders have decided to offer a reward to all the family head candidates. You are almost the last one to know. Got it. Huaisheng understood. Whoever catches that guy will be the family head. What are you thinking? Will the Looming Hall allow it? Those guys can't do anything right, but it is too easy for them to mess things up. Hoopa sneered. They can only enter the final round and choose any border relic from the Riken family's treasury. That's it. Huaisheng curled his lips in disdain. There should be a limit to lying to country people, right? Choosing any border relic from the Riken family's treasury sounded good, but in reality, by the time it was your turn to choose, the good stuff would have already been taken away. It would be like picking trash for you to choose. It would be troublesome no matter which one you chose. Plus, Huaisheng did not care about ordinary border relics. The sword of virtue, the axe of fury, the spear of compassion, the sword of hatred, not to mention Beelzebub, even the shoulder bag he was carrying was a divine artifact. Moreover, he had a Tong Law dream at home that would grant his every request. Why would he care about this? In comparison, the promise of entering the final round was more sincere. This was especially true for Huaisheng. He was not a professional chef who had a bunch of recipes in his stomach. It was just a part-time job. It was okay to steal chickens occasionally, but if he really had to fight with a professional, he would be a bit scared. Being able to skip the middle process and enter the final round was undoubtedly a great opportunity for him. By then, he would just have to sit and wait for Hoopa's sister's representative to fight. Then, he would lower his head and admit defeat, and he would be able to take the money home. It was so easy and simple, but Huaisheng asked curiously, it's such a good thing, but the other candidates actually agreed. Of course, why wouldn't they agree? This is the best time to show off your strength. As long as you can prove your ability, you can obtain more important value. At the same time, it's also a chance to openly eliminate competitors. Hoopa snorted. That old man Quanjiang already saw through it and found a chance to make a scene. He's not afraid of being ordered to commit seppuku after the family leader selection at all. He'll give the emperor and the general a hard time. By including solving the serial murder cases as a condition for the family leader selection, it gave all the candidates room to express themselves. From this moment on, the competition would spread outside the range of the imperial chef and demon trials. It would not be strange if a few groups of people used the excuse of investigating a murderer to walk on the streets. You said you're not a murderer, so why are you strolling on the streets in the middle of the night? Enough, stop talking and come with me. Otherwise, I won't be polite. There were so many excuses to stir up trouble. Just thinking about it made Huaishi's teeth hurt. No, this is too troublesome. It's not within the cooking competition. After picking his feet while pretending to be Miss Paper, he slapped his knee and said loudly, I have to pay more. Chapter 632. In the end, Hoopa didn't pay. Huaishir wasn't Hoopo's agent now. Even if he caught the murderer, Hoopa wouldn't get any extra benefits. Spending money to find a tool for his cousin was still considered an alliance. If he spent money to help his cousin, then he would really be a fool. It seemed that the rich woman wasn't willing to pay. After thinking for a long time, Huaishir had to admit that Hoopa had changed. She was no longer the stinky sister who was willing to pay, but a stingy sister. It was really regrettable. After a simple search of the crime scene and finding nothing, Miss Hoopa rode her bicycle, her white dress fluttering in the wind, and left gracefully. The wind blowing in his face was so cool. After a long, long, long time, the sun slowly rose. The rising sun spread its light, pushing forward inch by inch, illuminating the crime scene. In the originally empty shadow, the outline of a banner slowly appeared. Under the sunlight, it appeared for a fleeting moment, then quickly disappeared. Only the door from the dream opened for a fleeting moment. Countless mist spurted out, transforming into the shape of a flying bird. It spread its wings with a metallic glow and soared above the sky of Nara. Not long after, it blended into the local crows without any surprise. In the customs of Ingzhou, there was no custom of hunting wild crow. On the contrary, unlike in Dongxia, crow was regarded as an auspicious sign and was treated well in the city. People even fed them regularly. So, on this day, the local crow saw a group of strange guests from other places. They spoke in a strange dialect, and when they came to visit, their voices were loud and clear. Although they didn't know what Old Thai double tap 666, holy shout, meant, it was interesting. However, it seemed to be quite interesting. Many crows had already started to cry out, indicating that this slogan was much more impressive than their cawing. Seeing their powerful strength and the various gifts they gave to the local crows, such as mineral water bottle caps, expired lunchboxes from convenience stores, glass balls, and so on, countless crows in Nara quickly mobilized, warmly helping this group of friends from other places to find clues. Target, strange warrior. Target, pink helmet. Target, death. Target, abnormality. And target, local specialty yellow book. Damn. The XP of these foreign crows is so F***king weird. Why would they want this? Through the cage of dreams, Huaishir's vision was evenly focused on the flock of crows. He was constantly paying attention to the clues that the crows reported to him. Then, he coldly and mercilessly confiscated the books. Humph, if you don't learn the right things at such a young age, be careful that you won't be able to grow tall in the future. This was all to protect the mental health of the crows. They were still young and were still growing. How could they withstand this? If there's anything, just come at me, torment me, the leader of the group. However, one thing that could be considered as growth was that the crows were gradually able to communicate with Huaishir to a certain extent, apart from urging him to record every day. The increase in his intelligence level was very obvious. If it was simple work like surveillance and searching for clues, it would be no problem to leave it to them. This method of searching for a needle in a haystack was a test of manpower and endurance. If they wanted to get clues, they had to be patient. After an entire day, He confiscated quite a few books, but in reality, there wasn't much progress. He could only slowly wait. However, on the same night, the strange maid wearing a white racket mask came to inform him again. The second chef-demon duel was about to begin. The two sides of the duel were the traitor Rikimi, who had the backing of Dongsha, and her sixth uncle, the current manager of Mount Guan Energy, Rikimi Shino. Hupo's first chef-demon duel was indeed something to look forward to. What Huai sure cared more about was her substitute chef-demon, the old monster from Dongsha, who was said to be over 100 years old, Guashuk, long before Huai Shi was born. This old Gua had been stirring up trouble in hell and had been famous for a long time. Although it was said that he had been viciously tricked by his own disciple, causing his energy to decline and even his sense of smell to be lost, he had actually made a comeback. This was something to look forward to. Even if his skills had greatly declined, Guashuk was still one of the few powerful opponents in the chef-demon duel. As for his opponent, it was the chef-demon of industrial cuisine, Jordan Ku Zhijian, who came from a new cuisine that had appeared in recent years like a dark horse. According to the information provided by Hupa, this chef-demon who had become famous in recent years was a mixed blood from Ryukyu. He grew up in Detroit and was taught by the current representative of industrial cuisine, the 7-star chef-demon, Nitrogen Anderson. At the age of 14, he had become an official chef-demon. It could be said that he was the rising star of the new generation of chef-demons and was also a great enemy that many candidates were wary of. A veteran chef-demon who had yet to recover from his injuries, and a rising star who had inherited the brand new industrial cuisine. The outcome of the duel between the two immediately caught the attention of all the contestants. By the time Huai Shi and Zhen Shi arrived, it was already the last round. The other candidates and chef-demons who had received the news first had already taken the best seats and were eagerly waiting. In order to maintain the distance between them, they could only sit in the last row. In fact, Huai Shi had originally planned to come alone, but after learning about the situation, Zhen Shi also insisted on coming. As a candidate to be the head of the family, she could not always hide behind the agent. After hesitating for a while, Huai Shi still nodded. Since she was already involved, it would not be good for her to cover her eyes and act like an ostrich. At most, if they encountered a situation where she lost her mind, he would quickly cover her eyes and knock her out so that she would not be traumatized. Miss Huai Ji's arrival seemed to have attracted a lot of hostile gazes, which were not concealed at all. After seeing her method of knocking down Shen Jinqing with a glass of ice water, many people had already regarded her as a strong enemy in their hearts. There was even no lack of killing intent and some kind of unpleasant desire among them. Huai Shi had already expected this. In the first place, he did not think about friendship first and competition second. If he really loved to work, he would not be a chef-demon. Those who could be called a chef-demon were all not good people, including Huai Shi himself. No matter if it was for the sake of eating, for the sake of filling their stomachs, or for the sake of other random things, anyone who harbored such desires and set foot in the abyss and into the depths of hell knew just how abnormal their actions were. Huai Shi, who was originally a harmless machine of negative energy, could even cause a large-scale origin substance epidemic if forced into a corner. What about other people who were unscrupulous and unscrupulous? Everyone who dared to look over was met with Huai Shi's gaze. His eyes, which were filled with countless negative origin substances, were like abysses that burned with flames. He did not try to hide his terrifying aura at all, coldly implanting a massive shadow into the minds of those who offended him. Countless painful curses from the imperial divine blade. Resentment flashed through the air. The pure disaster tore apart the weak disguise and bared its fangs, causing the world to finally calm down. At the top of the tower, The bell finally rang out. The emissary behind the curtain stood up as usual. After saying a bunch of nonsense that no one would pay attention to, he returned to his seat. Jiang Quan's voice sounded out once again. Both sides, fair and square, will decide the victor in a single battle. The chef-demon duel had officially begun. Ha! The younger generation will surpass us in time. Behind the kitchen counter, a hunchbacked old man in a dongxia robe raised his head. His wrinkled face was filled with a strange smile as he observed his opponent. When I was as young as you, I never had such accomplishments. I'm getting old. I'm getting old. Since you're getting old, why don't you just obediently roll into the dustbin of history? Why make people waste their energy cleaning it up? His opponent, the sturdy young man Johnny Gu Zhijian, also raised his head and glanced over. He did not try to hide his disgust at Gu Zhijian's pretentious appearance. In a nutshell, this young man could be described as tough. His body was sturdy, but not burly. His muscles were well developed, but they were not exaggerated. His skin was bronzed from the sun, and his joints were thick. His hands were covered in calluses, and his hair was short. He wore thick gray overalls and a white vest. That was all he was wearing. He was like a piece of metal that had been forged by a 10,000-ton press. He did not try to hide his toughness and coldness as he coldly said, "The duel has already begun. Don't waste any more time. When people get old, they like to talk. Don't embarrass them like that." Guishuk narrowed his eyes slightly. Young people don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. They have to suffer some losses before they know how to respect their seniors. Uffed. Johnny tilted his head and violently spat on the ground. After he raised his foot to wipe it away, he raised his head and sneered. "Old man, the times are improving. Do you know that? The methods of the past are no longer working. Your witch doctor methods of ranking by seniority are long outdated. The 23rd century is the era of industrialization. No, the era of humans is the era of industrialization. Absolute precision, absolute standards, and absolute output. These are the standards of victory." He raised his 5 fingers and clenched them tightly. He told him word by word, "Old man who has been abandoned by the era, obediently go back to your shack and cook porridge." That was indeed an incomparably tough and tough style. Just by standing there, in a brief trance, it was as if there were roars and loud noises from the factory. Countless pungent dust formed a gray fog that rose from the forest of chimneys, covering the sky and covering the earth. That was a magnificent scene, brought about by massive production. It was a brutal beauty inherited from the industrial world. This was indeed the essence of industrial cuisine. Even if it was just a short illusion, it could still make people understand that this man was not a nobody, but a powerhouse who came here with absolute power and skill. Anyone who dared to belittle and despise him would have to pay the price. In this regard, Guishuk only smiled and looked at him kindly, as if he was looking at an ignorant kid. Then, this old man will wait and see. Chapter 633. 10 minutes had passed. Guishuk had not moved at all since the start of the competition. He could not even hear the sound of his breathing. It was as if the person standing there was not an old ghost whose hair and eyebrows were almost gone, but an ugly piece of rotten wood. It was placed right outside his opponent's cooking table. It was such an eyesore. He only lowered his head and focused on observing Johnny's cooking table. He scrutinized every tool and watched his every move and step. His narrowed eyes widened with curiosity and anticipation. He looked like a child who had just come to school for the first time. He felt that everything was amazing and novel. This was not bad. That was not bad. Everything was not bad. Was there anything else that was amazing? Hurry up and take it out for me to see. He had clearly expressed his admiration in such a frank manner, but it was still so unpleasant. The violent and vicious aura behind the cooking table became even more fierce. Johnny stared silently at Gwashuk. The veins on his thick arms bulged. He pressed them against the cooking table, bent down, and looked down at Gwashuk. "Old ghost, what are you looking at?" "I'm looking at you," Gwashuk answered without any embarrassment. "I'm observing my opponent and looking for your mistakes. But to be honest, your basic skills are perfect. There are no mistakes in the way you handle the ingredients. You're really amazing, Mr. Gujijian. You must have gone through countless trials and tribulations, right? I could see that every movement that didn't require any thought and skillful technique must have been obtained through countless repetitions of training. Aside from this amazing talent, your hard work and diligence are also far above mine. The fighting spirit of a young person is truly terrifying." Boom! There was a sudden explosion. On the cooking table, countless tools and ingredients suddenly flew up and then fell back down in a panic. This was because a hand covered in veins had already left a deep crack on the cooking table. "Are you done talking?" Johnny Gujijian raised his head and asked coldly. "Yes, I'm done. Since you like to watch, then watch, old ghost." Johnny bent down and leaned closer. He grinned and said indifferently, "You can play whatever tricks you want. It's fine if you destroy my ingredients and interfere with my cooking. But that won't change the result because your petty tricks won't affect me at all." He withdrew his gaze and lowered his head. Piece by piece, he threw away the ferocious turkey in his hand. He skillfully let out the blood and dissected it in an orderly manner. He wasn't afraid that the other party would secretly learn his skills. He wasn't even afraid that the other party would destroy his ingredients when he wasn't paying attention. He allowed Gwashuk to blabber on and on. His expression was cold. There was no trace of anger. He seemed to have become one with the concrete, steel, lime, and so on, turning into a man-made iron and stone statue. Even if the sky collapsed and the earth cracked, he would not waver in the slightest. Since the age of 8, as an illegal immigrant who was despised by other people, he had been pushing a dining cart and wandering the streets with his master. They wandered between the slums and the commercial district, avoiding the searches of the Food Administration Bureau, the pursuit of the police, the extortion of the gangs, and the exclusion of his peers. He endured and adapted in countless hostile environments, then transformed, and finally became the master. In the roaring hot steel mill, in the dusty production workshop, in the noisy and chaotic slums, next to the mosquito-flying garbage dump. What was born from the roots of the deepest part of Detroit was this swift, fast, high-heat, and flawless industrial cuisine. Gwashuk's tricks were not even comparable to the sound of a fly to him. In just a few minutes, all the ingredients had been processed. It was time to make, without any protection. The hand pulled up the red-hot lid of the pot. The thin and pitiful temperature couldn't even penetrate the thick calyces. The moment the pot lid was lifted, a terrifying tide engulfed the entire arena. It was so pungent, so rich, and so tyrannical that the smell spread to the tip of everyone's nose, making them widen their eyes in disbelief. Was that engine oil? Weisher took a deep breath and finally confirmed that it was indeed engine oil. Now, what was boiling and rolling in the huge pot of oil was all engine oil. But when he smelled the smell, he couldn't help but take a deep breath. He felt an indescribable sense of pleasure. Even though he knew it was so pungent and unhealthy, he couldn't help but want to breathe in more, to feel this sudden stimulation and pleasure. The rough smell lingering at the tip of his nose gradually dissolved and became sweet. It was like flowers and plants, like trees like agarwood. And in the midst of drifting, it developed a completely different smell. It was intoxicating. At the same time, it was difficult to endure the hunger and thirst. It wasn't until Huaisha reached out and forced Zhen Shi to sit on the chair that she realized that she had stood up at some point. She became hungry and couldn't help but want to pounce forward. She was intoxicated by the smell of engine oil and couldn't extricate herself. Her consciousness was already starting to fade. Huaisha clenched his fist, and when he opened his palm again, a small pinch of ash appeared, and he poured it directly into her nose. The ash smelled like salt and refreshed the mind. In an instant, as the pure negative origin substance spread out, Makoto's eyes became red. Tears began to flow out of her eyes, as if she was recalling some painful past. She even wasted a tissue from Huaisha. After crying for a long time, she finally reacted. "What's wrong with me?" Miss Huaisha sighed and took out her phone to show her. Organic solvent addiction, this was a tendency that most people innately had, and even they didn't notice it. Engine oil, rosin, turpentine, paint. In the face of this volatile substance, it was obviously pungent and was not good for the body, but when one wanted to smell it or even imagine a similar smell, a sense of hunger that only smokers could understand would emerge in one's chest. In serious cases, you would even be intoxicated by it, unable to extricate yourself. This was already an intoxicating substance similar to tobacco or alcohol. Just the smell alone was enough to make ordinary people show symptoms of poisoning and addiction. As a culinary demon, Johnny's skills could be said to have reached the point of perfection, and it was admirable. And now, Johnny picked up a bucket of seasoning, one handful after another, and covered the prepared ingredients with a large amount of spices. He casually rubbed, and his hands burst forth with terrifying strength like a cement mixer, kneading the spices into the raw turkey meat. "Oh." Guishuk raised his eyebrows. "Young man, you're not planning to use engine oil to fry it, are you?" "Can't I?" Johnny grinned and mocked. The blood of industry is engine oil, and the king of engine oil is Erickson. Today, I've prepared the signature dish of industrial cuisine, Erickson fried chicken set. Along with his movements, all the ingredients fell into the boiling pot. In an instant, a loud boiling sound burst forth, and a large amount of black smoke rose up, violently spreading in all directions, like a chemical reaction. The chicken that submitted to the engine oil emitted a crazy, strange fragrance that blended into the pungent smell of the engine oil, forming a mist that instantly covered the entire venue. The rich smell of the fried chicken and the pungent engine oil combined into one, and when they overlapped, it exploded with 10 times the power of infection. Even Huaisha couldn't help but want to praise such a godly creation. Traces of darkness spread out from Miss Huaisha's side, vaguely enveloping Zhen Shi and isolating her. If a normal person smelled this, wouldn't they instantly become a crazy glutton like a zombie? High-fat, high-calorie food was the most basic requirement for every life form to survive. It was a desire that had been engraved in human genes, cells, and origin substances since ancient times. No matter how unhealthy it was for modern people, for those in history who were hungry all year round, it was a blessing, a two-pronged attack. The natural attraction of the high-calorie fried chicken and the magical temptation of the engine oil combined into one, forming a projection of a large city in the spreading black smoke. It was a city that was covered in smog, soot, and the rumbling of machinery. It was America's shining industrial pearl, Detroit, the shining light of industry. This place had indeed become the stage of industrial cuisine, and everything was under Johnny's control. When the golden chicken was scooped out of the oil, it shone with a golden light. In an instant, row after row of fried chicken were drained of oil powder, and wrapped in a pungent smell, they were placed on the chopping board. Chicken drumsticks, chicken wings, chicken breasts, chicken hearts, chicken fillets, chicken burgers. Johnny's movements were as quick and precise as an assembly line. Large cardboard boxes were placed one after another in a row. This was definitely not a portion that a single person could finish. You actually made so many servings. Gwashuk raised his head in shock, a trace of bitterness appearing on his wrinkled face. I'm an old bag of bones, and I can't finish them all. Isn't this a little too despicable? Don't worry. If I want to defeat an old thing like you, I don't need to use such a despicable method. Johnny tilted his head, lit a cigarette, and casually shook off the ash. The workers have very bad tempers, even worse than you. They're violent, easily angered, loud, and don't know when to back down. After a day of hard work, their stomachs are rumbling with hunger. I can't let these customers wait for too long, and I can't let these workers go home disappointed. The essence of industrial cuisine is absolute output, absolute standards, and absolute satiation. As he spoke, he grinned, looked at the surrounding stages, and said provocatively, I've made servings for 10 people today. Friends who are interested can come up on stage to collect them later. But once they cool down, they won't taste good anymore. As he spoke, Johnny picked up a large cardboard box that was even bigger than Gwashuk's head with a cigarette in his hand and placed it in front of Gwashuk. Please, old man, before you die, have a good taste of the new era's skills. Inside the cardboard box was a dazzling array of fried food, and it even came with a large bottle of iced happy water. This was enough for a family of 3 to eat for an entire day. It was an extremely large Exxon fried chicken set meal. Gwashuk picked up the cardboard box, lowered his head, and looked at the heat bombs in the box. He fell into deep thought for a long time. Are you afraid? Johnny sneered mockingly. No, I'm just curious, young man. Gwashuk reached out and grabbed a drumstick that was even bigger than his face. He moved closer and examined it. He could not help but chuckle softly. Although I'm an old thing who can't keep up with the times, at least I can still tell the difference. How is this fried chicken? He laughed loudly and exposed Johnny's pretense, causing his smile to stiffen for a moment. This is clearly tempura. Chapter 634. Tempura. Not only him, but even the culinary demons in the audience were stunned by such a conclusion. What the hell? Why did he suddenly change from fried chicken to tempura? Even if they were both fried foods, he shouldn't have said something so ridiculous, right? However, when Johnny's smile stiffened slightly, everyone couldn't help but believe him. Could this really be a F** king tempura? Indeed, if one looked at it from this angle, all the fried foods were extremely thin, and when the audience looked down at the box in Gwashuk's hand, they discovered that there wasn't even a trace of oil in the white paper box. Moreover, looking at the even heat, there was no doubt that all the ingredients had been cooked in such a short time. Just by looking at it, one could tell that the taste was excellent. I've never heard of tempura in industrial cuisine, Mr. Gujijian. Gwashuk looked at the chicken leg in his hand and smiled as he looked up. Is this considered a rebellion against the master? This is called pioneering and innovating. Johnny arrogantly raised his head. As a disciple, if you only know how to stick to the old ways and follow the master's path, you won't be as useful as a $200 friar. Then, what's the point of being a culinary demon? You're saying the same thing as my student. Gwashuk raised his eyebrows and looked at the fried chicken tempura in his hand. Soon, he said, if this old man didn't see wrong, this should be a unique way of cooking in the Ryukyu region. Amazing fusion, Johnny Gujijian. In the future, industrial cuisine will be greatly expanded by you. I can feel your master's gratification to be able to perfectly fuse 2 completely different cuisines, as expected of the Americas. Even though he was praising him with such admiration, he didn't feel happy at all. When those eyes looked at him, it was as if he couldn't hide any secrets. Even the source of his creativity was clearly seen. Johnny Gujijian didn't feel any fear or uneasiness. Instead, he became even more excited. Only with such an opponent could there be fun in challenging him. Have I been seen through? Johnny nodded. That's right. This is a brand new Exxon fried chicken set. Although it's made using the concept of industrial cuisine, the way it's made came from my hometown. Although it's not a problem to call it a fried chicken set meal, it's the name of the war. It originates from the industrial cuisine of Ryukyu engine oil tempura. Please, Grandpa. He gestured with his hand and said, "Eat it while it's hot. You can live longer if you eat it." Gwashuk looked at the things in the box and couldn't help but shake his head. No matter how delicious these things are, eating them will only shorten one's lifespan, right? Ha! In Ryukyu, who hasn't eaten it when they were young? This is the crystallization and delicacy of an era of hunger and thirst. Things like life and death depend on fate. When you're alive, you should eat happily. So, the Ryukyu people really don't know how to maintain their health. Gwashuk shook his head and raised his hand. Then, have a taste. Just like swallowing an elixir, he opened his mouth and bit into the fried chicken with his gums, which only had a few teeth left. At that moment, an appetizing sound spread out and resounded in everyone's ears. Everyone couldn't help but swallow their saliva. The first thing they felt was the rich fragrance of the meat, followed by the terrifying spiciness and the sweet and sour taste of the sauce. When the fragrant and tender chicken, wrapped in the magical smell of engine oil, slid down their throats, they felt as if their mouths and noses were burning and shrouded in flames. Then, a bomb exploded in their sense of taste. It was an explosion in the physical sense. A low rumble suddenly sounded from the hunchbacked body. A terrifying power erupted from the weak stomach. The moment it came into contact with the stomach acid, the spices that were evenly kneaded into the muscles triggered an exquisite combination reaction under the interference of the source substance. Then, in the blink of an eye, it achieved an explosive explosion. Black smoke spewed out of Gwashuk's mouth and nose. It was so dense. But then there was a tearing sound because Gwashuk was expanding. His joints were rubbing against each other, and his muscles were squirming. The hunchbacked old man gradually straightened his back and began to swell like a balloon. A terrifying heat began to rise from under his rapidly tensing skin. The heat hidden within his muscles was transforming, quickly transforming into a wave of vitality that poured into the old man's body. It didn't matter whether or not the old man could withstand it. It wanted to completely destroy him from the inside out. However, he didn't collapse. Instead, he transformed into a muscular old man with white hair as thick as a lion's. His upper body was naked, and his sturdy muscles were covered in scars. He was no longer as old as before. Instead, he had become fierce, cold, violent, and dignified. How was he still a hunchbacked old man? He was clearly a savage giant ape from the mountains that roamed among tens of thousands of beasts. Right in front of Johnny, the ferocious old man opened his mouth and devoured the oil tempura in his hand, sucking away the oil stains on his fingers. He wasn't stingy with his praise. Oh, so much vitality. This spicy sensation is so wonderful. It can actually restore me to my 90-year-old state. He sighed in amazement. Johnny Gujijian, you're amazing. The spicy wave of vitality didn't burn him to death. Instead, it caused him to become excited. He finished the drumstick in his hand in a few mouthfuls. Then, he grabbed the chicken wing. He threw it into his mouth and couldn't stop at all. It was like a whirlwind sweeping away the clouds. He carefully savored the stimulating fragrance that kept erupting on the tip of his tongue. It was as if he was swallowing a bomb alive. He swallowed the essence of the disaster into his stomach bit by bit. The first thing he felt was hunger, then pain, and then despair. There was also that lingering greed. That's right, greed. Greed was the essence of this dish at that moment. In front of Johnny Gu Zijian, the old man's movements stiffened for a moment. His ferocious face froze on the spot. Suddenly, a crack appeared. Incinerating light and thick black smoke continuously rose from within. Inside the empty shell, signs of the factory's rumbling could be heard on that badly damaged face. Guishuk revealed a smile of approval. Johnny Gu Zijian, I have to admit that I've underestimated you. He raised his head and praised without holding back. It's really terrifying. I've already experienced your creation. It seems to be born from industry. But in fact, in order to fill one's stomach, even if it's the blood of the earth like oil, it's no different from subliming a person into an indestructible steel. You must have an even more terrifying dish that you haven't taken out, right? Just like that, he swallowed the overly large chicken set meal in his hand into his stomach. He allowed the crack on his face to spread, revealing the illusion of the city hidden in the haze and thick smoke. In order to survive, he didn't hesitate to destroy the world. In order to continue living, he didn't hesitate to destroy himself. Such crazy determination and willpower made people praise and applaud him. I can say with certainty, Johnny. He raised a finger and announced solemnly, if it weren't for me, there would be no one else other than you who would be the champion of this competition. It's a pity that you met me today. In his mouth, the burger that was burning with raging flames was completely swallowed into his stomach. In one gulp, he absorbed the prototype of the disaster that had fused with countless industrial wastes into his body. Then, the thick smoke, flames, and the huge illusion of the industrial industry behind the crack on his face completely disappeared without a trace. What replaced them was nothingness. There was nothing in the empty shell under the flesh and blood. Or rather, there was some strange light. It was as if there was the outline of the earth, nature, mountains, rivers, and all things. There were dark stars moving in the ferocious sea. However, things could not be seen clearly. He could only instinctively understand one thing: the industrial cuisine. No, the industry itself was swallowed in front of him. The crack shrank inch by inch. Guishuk grinned and laughed tyrannically. The successor of Iya is an ominous thing that would even eat his own children for the sake of delicious food. A mere piece of steel is nothing to him. Johnny's will was firm, and he froze on the spot. It was as if he had been frozen. It was difficult to hide the uneasiness in his heart. At that moment, the ferocious darkness that he saw through the crack, the terrifying nature of this old thing in front of him. Guishuk was still smiling as he looked around. Next, it should be my turn, right? As he spoke, he lowered his head and looked at the huge pot of oil on the cooking table. Ignoring the boiling oil, he stretched out his finger, dipped it, and sucked it into his mouth. He sighed with emotion, clear and sweet. What a good pot of oil. Can you lend it to me? In the silence, Johnny's expression was gloomy as he slowly nodded. He wanted to see what this old thing was going to do with his pot of oil. Guishuk's body gradually stooped, returning to its former stooped and shriveled state. His muscles relaxed, and his appearance changed from fierce to ugly. It was abominable. After circling the pot of oil a few times, he nodded thoughtfully. This is a rare opportunity. Then, here, I will show everyone a famous Dongsha dish, boiled cabbage. The entire arena was dead silent. Boiled cabbage. Boiled cabbage again. Do you F*** king know how to make anything else? This is a F*** king pot of oil. Why the hell are you making boiled cabbage? You only said boiled cabbage. Where is your cabbage? Are you going to forget it again? Johnny could not bear the humiliation. He punched the chopping board and shouted angrily, old thing, can't you not make a fool of yourself with that outdated thing? Gwashuk frowned and fell into silence. After a long time, he shook his head helplessly and sighed. Outdated? That's too much. He sighed, bent down, opened his toolbox, took out the seasonings one by one, and placed them on the table in convenient places. Even an old man like me is still studying today. He raised his eyes and calmly told the young man in front of him, reading books, reading newspapers, using the internet, participating in competitions, shamelessly mixing in groups, shamelessly praising young people, secretly learning, blackmailing. I am willing to do anything to win. For the sake of this desire for good food, I will not hesitate to go to hell. He started from the time he walked into the kitchen at the age of 3. He became a chef at the age of 12, finished his apprenticeship at the age of 16, and surpassed his master at the age of 20. At the age of 25, he began to travel around the world. At the age of 41, he turned his eyes to the border. At the age of 62, he chose to go to hell. In order to pursue the ultimate desire for good food, he did not hesitate to set foot on the land of bliss. He even completed the great deed of meeting the rancher and returning. Doomsday cuisine, Roman cuisine, Ingzhou cuisine, American cuisine, Russian Federation cuisine, from breakfast to dinner, from desserts to wine. Gwashuk continued to devour everything, constantly pursuing a deeper limit. Until today, he had never given up in the slightest. Now, he was actually called an outdated old thing. Wasn't that too much? Wasn't that underestimating his culinary skills too much? Wasn't that too looking down on all the chef demons that he had eaten too much? Watch carefully, Mr. Gujijian. This is the outdated cuisine that you don't take seriously. But even if it's an outdated cuisine, there will be a day when it can be rejuvenated. He raised his hand, picked up the spoon beside him, and stirred the boiling oil in the pot. As long as the chef still exists, as long as the desire is not cut off, this precious meaning will always exist. What you lost to is not me, but this foundation that has been accumulated for thousands of years. Johnny crossed his arms and was about to retort, but his gaze was attracted by the blurry image in the pot of oil. Under the stirring of the spoon, the boiling oil in the pot calmed down inconceivably, reflecting something incredible. But then, the mirror image was broken again. This was because the clear oil was swirling, forming a small vortex, rippling in the pot of oil. Under the sprinkling of all kinds of seasonings, it seemed to have formed a clear soup. He casually took the leftover chicken and bones from Johnny and threw them into the pot of oil. A fiery fragrance rose. Unlike before, even the terrifying invasion of the oil disappeared without a trace, replaced by a faintly discernible gentleness and sweetness. It was like a floating paradise, glowing with a misty light, pure and sacred. In the deep light, something seemed to be rapidly sprouting and brewing, making him couldn't help but move closer to take a closer look. The closer he got, the more he could feel the warm and heavy fragrance from the chicken stewed in the oil. He couldn't help but drool. Under Johnny's gaze, the vortex of oil gradually calmed down, and the scene that he had caught a glimpse of finally appeared again, becoming clearer and clearer. Finally, from the reflection of the oil, he caught a glimpse of the outline hidden in the light. That blurry reflection. That was himself in the audience. Huaishur was the first to react. He raised his hand and covered Zhengxi's eyes. This was no longer a realm that could be described as simple boiled cabbage, and the next scene was not something that Zhengxi could accept. Please appreciate. It gathers the essence of disaster from Dongsha and Rome. It's a new subspecies of fusion, hell cuisine, boiled cabbage. Amidst the crisp sound of the soup being stirred and knocked on the edge of the pot, Gwashuk announced his work in fluent Latin. Boiling water judgment Caldaria. It was at that moment that a pure and unsullied light that seemed to come from heaven soared into the sky from the pot of oil, surpassing original sin and punishment, bringing with it the light of mercy and liberation. A generous hymn sounded from the illusion as if it could redeem all sinners. At this moment, Johnny Gu Zijin finally walked into this paradise. Tempted by the illusion from hell, the man fell into the boiling pot of oil with a plop. Without any struggle, he sank to the bottom of the pot. Long before that, his soul had already been captured by the cauldron of the abyss. This was the last cabbage that was missing in the refreshing broth. Using opponents as ingredients was the specialty of the cooking demon. At that moment, an intoxicating aroma finally gushed out from the pot. With a mellow smell, it enveloped the tip of everyone's nose and interweaved an illusion of heaven before their eyes. It was sweet and sinful, lingering in the darkest part of everyone's soul, whispering blasphemous or holy words in their ears. It was indeed the fusion cuisine that Guashuk had mentioned. Through the cooking of boiled cabbage, after gathering the elements of water and fire, it formed the most primitive heresy trial, purifying everything in boiling water. In the end, it returned to being pure. The essence of the 5,000-year cuisine of Dongxia was fused with the disaster of the medieval Rome, witch trials, creating a dish that was like divine punishment. The life that lived because of this pot would also die because of this pot. This was the true meaning of Paradise Lost. Then, young man, how does this dish taste? Guashuk lowered his head, looking down at the pot of oil in front of him, and asked jokingly, "Excellent." A muffled and admiring exclamation came from the pot of oil. Amidst the boiling grease, a thumb slowly rose. His body felt endless pain and suffering, but his soul was quiet and peaceful. It was as if he was going to sleep in this beautiful paradise. Even if it was treated as a part of the dish, Gu Zijin could not deny that this was the essence of the abyss that he could never reach in this disaster. There was also the huge gap between them. Even though he still had the strength to struggle, he no longer had any fighting spirit. When the old man stood in front of the pot of oil, he was already destined to be defeated. Learn to respect history, Mr. Gu Zijin. Even an old ghost like me will keep pace with the times. Guashuk raised his hand and scooped a spoonful of boiling oil from the pot with a spoon. He put it into his mouth and tasted it carefully. It was hot enough to burn his throat into his stomach, savoring every change in taste. In the end, he could not help but shake his head regretfully. Unfortunately, in the end, it's still a little inexperienced. Shaking his head regretfully, the old man casually tossed the spoon aside and turned to leave. His stooped figure disappeared into the darkness little by little. The entire arena was dead silent, apart from Gu Zijin, who was blowing bubbles in the pot of oil. No one else made a sound. The second round of the trial of the Imperial Chef Demon. Dongxia's Chef Demon, Guashuk wins. Today's boring little knowledge. As everyone knew, fried food consumed a lot of oil, especially tempura. After World War II, the poor people of Okinawa went crazy from hunger. It was naturally impossible for them to eat tempura. How could there be so much oil? Therefore, someone patted his head and thought of an idea. Why don't we just fry it with oil? Of course, fried oil would not taste good, and because there were many harmful substances in oil, it could even be life-threatening. However, everyone still had to eat it. Moreover, they were about to starve to death. Who cared so much? Moreover, it was said that the smell of fried oil was different from each other. Among them, the recognized best brand of oil was the prototype of the Exxon Energy Group, Mobil. Therefore, this thing's official name was Mobil Tempura. At that time, everyone ate it happily at various festivals. And in various senses of the word, moreover, once this thing started to explode, black smoke would billow. The people in the surrounding villages would look up. Wow, what a big smoke! It must be Uchiha's family who was frying tempura. Therefore, they would gather in groups to take a few bites. It was really hard to imagine that scene. According to many Japanese blogs, this thing is really edible. The proof is that all the old people in Okinawa have eaten it. I'm thinking people who eat it to death probably don't have the chance to become old, right? What was even worse was that after eating it, the oil could not be digested by the human body. In addition to the usual grain cycle, it would also seep out through the skin. It was said that there would be 2 big oily marks on the stones where people sat down to rest after eating it. It was as magical as a photocopier. It was not easy to survive in these difficult times. You either starved to death or ate things that would kill you. Everyone should cherish the good life that you have now. Chapter 635. Gwashuk was very strong. More accurately, he was so strong that it made people scared. From a cooking demon's perspective, there was no way to surpass him. On the way back, Huaishur kept thinking about the scene he had just witnessed. It wasn't some dazzling skill. Instead, it was as simple and easy to understand as a bench press. He was showing off his strength. He was using his opponent's oil, his opponent's tools, and his opponent's spoon. He was growing his own fruit from the fertile soil of industrial cuisine. Even his opponent could easily become a part of his food. What Huaishur saw from Gwashuk's body was the essence behind the term cooking demon. It was a madness and terror that came from the extreme desire for good food. Over the course of 100 years, that old man had slowly absorbed the dew of the entire world, gathering it into his own terrifying ocean. Here, he was provoking and intimidating all of his opponents. This terrifying level of attainment had already become a mountain, weighing down on all of the contestants' hearts, making it hard for them to breathe, including Huaishur himself. Even if he had enough ingredients and time, would he be able to cook a soup that could compare to the boiled cabbage that his opponent had casually created? Huaishur didn't know. Most likely not. Perhaps there was a possibility, or perhaps there was a chance, but it was more likely that this was just his subconscious mind comforting himself. Apart from his control of negative origin substances and his research on poisons, he was just a half-baked cooking demon. If it weren't for the fact that Tangi had tricked him, he wouldn't have taken this exam. He carefully counted the basic culinary skills he learned from Uncle Fong, the culinary skills he learned from the Heavenly Dog, Longshan Square, the culinary skills he learned from the Heavenly Dog, Longshan Square, and the various advanced skills he learned from the various culinary demons during the process of compiling a simple recipe for cooking ingredients from hell. He had pieced everything together for free. His strength lay in his ability to deal with negative origin substances and poisons. His alchemy flames gave him absolute control over the flames, as well as the refinement of the forger's furnace. These few aspects made him completely superior to most cooking demons. However, his shortcomings were equally obvious. Apart from these few points, he did not reach the average level of everyone else. He did not have any secret techniques, experience accumulated over countless years, or even recipes that were passed down to only one person in the faction. How could an unorthodox method be compared to a professional? Look at your dog's heart and dog's face. How can you compete with others on the same stage? No matter how he thought about it, he could only come to a conclusion if he were to encounter Gwashuk in this culinary demon trial. Then he could prepare for GG in advance. If he surrendered, he would lose half the battle. At the very least, he wouldn't fall to the point of jumping into the pot to embarrass himself. Even after the pot of oil had turned cold, Zhu Zhijin was still unwilling to come out of the pot. It was simply too embarrassing and embarrassing. There was nothing more humiliating than failure. If he were a few years younger, Mr. Johnny might have cried out of anger. If he wasn't careful, and Miss Huaiji ended up in the same situation, his plan to create a smuff would be ruined. Feeling the immense pressure, Even the drumstick in his mouth didn't taste as good. He gnawed on it mechanically until Maki, who was next to him, made a sound of panic. "Ah, Miss YG, hair, hair." She looked at Tsuko's head in shock. Her light green hair had turned fiery red, and wisps of flames were rising. She couldn't believe it. "It's burning." For a moment, she didn't know what to do. Should she quickly take off her shirt to put out the flames? It was a piece of cake. Huaishe raised his eyes and glanced at the top of his head. He casually stroked it twice with his fingers, and the flames were extinguished. However, the scorching heat was still there, and it could reignite at any time. Then he lowered his head and continued eating. Exxon fried chicken set, or in other words, super large plate of oil tempura. Yes, that's right. When she left, she took away the leftover turkey from Zhu Zhijian. At that time, she even politely asked for Zhu Zhijian's opinion. Then Zhu Zhijian, who was in the pot of oil, looked at the ceiling helplessly and waved his hand indifferently. And so, Miss YG carried the 9 huge paper boxes that were even taller than her and went home. As he ate, the top of his head was on fire. It was as if he was swallowing a bomb. He felt this incomparably terrifying impact. He had personally experienced Zhu Zhijian's powerful strength. It was said that he had even more powerful dishes. The most famous industrial cuisine was the Detroit family bucket. However, Huaishe probably wouldn't be able to see it. It was hard to say if Zhu Zhijian would have the courage to pick up a kitchen knife again in a short period of time. But this chicken box was really amazing. Huaishe ate mouthful after mouthful, and his entire body emitted a terrifying amount of heat. Wisps of pungent black smoke rose from the top of his head. Even the sound of his breathing was mixed with the sound of steel rubbing against each other. In the dream cage, those crows cawed excitedly, bathing in the curses and disasters that came from young Master Ming's sacred mark. Their iron-like bodies seemed to be burning red as well. When they flapped their wings, a series of fire sparkles were brought up. As expected of industrial cuisine, there was a lot of food. This huge amount of malice and madness made all the crows eat very happily. If it was the boiled cabbage from the boiling water trial, he would probably be able to get more food, right? However, Huaishe really wasn't interested in other people's bathwater. It was too disgusting. Thinking of that old ghost, Huaishe couldn't help but sigh again. "Miss Huaishe, are you worried about meeting that Mr. Gua in the next duel?" Under the silent moonlight, Zhenshi's voice suddenly came from the side. She asked curiously, "That person, is he very powerful?" Huaishe nodded. He didn't know how to explain it to her. Not only was he very powerful, he was so powerful that it made people's hair stand on end. For example, it was like the final boss suddenly appeared at the door of the beginner's village. He was terrifyingly powerful, but there's no need to fight, right? Zhenshi asked curiously, "Miss Huaishe, didn't you say that we have an agreement with Cousin Hupa? If we meet that person, can't we just admit defeat?" Huaishe was stunned. Zhenshi was right. In fact, he didn't have to fight with Guashuk at all. After all, he had a secret deal with Hupa from the beginning. They were completely fake. If they met Guashuk, wouldn't it be better to just admit defeat? The answer was, of course, not. In the silence, Huaishe's expression changed. However, he didn't feel relieved because of this realization. Instead, he felt even more disappointed. After witnessing that old guy's duel, he had already thrown the fake duel to the back of his mind. In other words, he didn't have time to think about other things besides how to defeat him. He couldn't help but be influenced by that crazy and pure willpower. He felt a completely different attraction from the chef's duel that he didn't care about in the past. He saw Guashuk as a strong enemy. Challenging such an enemy, no matter if he won or lost, he wouldn't regret it. Even if he was defeated so easily that he didn't have the courage to pick up cooking utensils and give up on being an abyss chef, it would be better than this. He wanted to win. Even if the chance was slim, he wanted to overestimate himself and fight with all his might, just like a real chef. Although it's not good to say this, I think Miss Huaisher won't lose to anyone in a real duel. In the silence, the girl who was walking beside him suddenly spoke. Full of trust and longing, she stared at his side profile, which was covered in oil and chili powder, and said confidently, "Because Miss Huaisher is definitely the strongest." For a moment, he was stunned. Huaisher didn't know what kind of answer to give. Should he be moved or ashamed? After a long time, he laughed silently. He reached out his hand to rub her hair and conveniently wiped his hand twice in the midst of the girl's distressed complaints. Then he continued to bury his head and eat. He was full of motivation. Since she trusted him so much, he couldn't drag her down. Even if he couldn't win against Guashuk, he couldn't lose to any other random characters, right? In short, let's do our best first. The result was that Huaisher ate all 9 boxes of oil tempura alone. All of them. Even Jiu Zijian couldn't believe it when he saw it. After all, this was physically impossible. The 9 boxes of tempura together weighed more than 10 kilograms, not to mention the industrial toxins that were processed in batches. For Guashuk's special edition. Even a single chicken wing contained the pneumoconiosis curse, heavy metal particles, and even elementium pollution, which was equivalent to the output of an entire steel mill for a month. Relying on his strong resistance to abyss corrosion and toxins, as well as sharing the burden with the crows, it took him a full 6 hours to finish all of it. Now he felt that his entire body had become the shape of oil, and everything looked like an engine and a spark plug. Even a burp could cause a large mouthful of smoke to come out of his mouth. And the detoxification of the forger's furnace was still ongoing. Now, the heavy metal in Huaisher's blood had seriously exceeded the limit, thousands of times higher than the safety limit. Normally, an ascendant wouldn't even talk about eating so much. Eating 1 box would probably turn them into iron and stone. Under the control of the sealing hand, piece after piece of rust peeled off from Huaisher's skin. He had shed 2 layers of skin, and his fingernails had grown back 4 or 5 times. He had also lost about 10 kilograms of hair. His body temperature was still hovering around 40 degrees Celsius, and there were still strands of red in his newly grown hair. It would probably take him an entire day to completely digest all of it. On the other hand, after the crows shared so much of the negative elementium, they were all incredibly excited and full of energy, as if they had taken stimulants. Beneath the metal wings, the countless gears, springs, and machinery that formed their bodies were covered in a layer of blue oil, as if they had been thoroughly lubricated and maintained. They were in incredibly good condition. It was rare for them to be able to eat their fill, and Huaisher didn't let them down. It seemed that he had grown quite a bit. However, the price was that even Huaisher had become restless. He had nowhere to vent the massive amount of energy in his body, and it was as if a flame was burning his soul. His eyes were burning red. He longed to vent to his heart's content and to do some intense post-meal exercise. He raised his eyes and looked at the night sky outside the window. What a beautiful moonlight! He let out a low hum. Chapter 636. At 4:00 in the morning, Zhen Shi woke up with a start from her dream. She heard someone knocking on her door. It was filled with anxiety and impatience. When she opened the door, she saw Miss Huaiji, who was completely different from what she had expected. She was still a beautiful woman, but now she was filled with an unsettling sense of threat. Her eyes were bloodshot and scarlet. Her long hair danced slightly like flames. Miss Huaiji. She froze on the spot and suddenly felt a little scared. Huaisha raised his hand and typed on his phone. I need to vent. Ah! The girl exclaimed and took a step back. She was stunned and in disbelief. I know. After a long time, she seemed to have made up her mind. Her expression finally calmed down, as if she had finally made up her mind. She straightened her neck and closed her eyes. Please, please, I don't have much experience. Please be gentle. Ah! Huaisha's eyes widened. He was so scared that he almost screamed. What the hell? I just wanted to tell you that I'm going out. That's all. What are you thinking? Jeanne, she closed her eyes and shivered like a little quail. Soon, he felt something hard being placed in his arms. It was heavy, huge, and scalding hot. It was like a small coal stove, and it was making noises. When she opened her eyes, she saw a crow looking at her, with its head raised. Then there was a second crow, a third, a fourth, until hundreds of crows occupied the entire courtyard. I'm going out. They will protect you. Ah! Jeanne, she was stunned for a long time. She widened her eyes and screamed again. She reached out and grabbed Miss Huaiji's wrist. She looked nervous. Girls can't be so casual. Miss Huaiji, the most precious thing must be given to the person you love when you get married. If you have to do that, then come at me. Huaisha felt that he had been turned upside down. Little sister, there's something wrong with you. What are you thinking? With your body. If I punch you, you might cry until the end of the chef's duel. He rolled his eyes and sighed. He typed again. I'm just going to find someone to fight. Dead silence. An awkward dead silence. Hina's pale face quickly turned red, and a strange whimper came from her throat, as if she was about to faint. She really wanted to say that she wasn't a shameless woman whose mind was filled with dirty things, but she didn't know how to explain it. She only wanted to shrink her head into a sand dune and hope that a lightning bolt would suddenly fall from the sky and strike her to death. Just think of it as me going out to buy an orange. Amidst the chaos, she felt a hand on her hair. The hand ruffled her hair and told her, stay in the bedroom. Don't move. She was stunned by the sudden impact. Miss Huaiji, you spoke to me? It was indeed the same as she had imagined, a mature voice with a hint of hoarseness and gentleness. But it was too vague and indistinct, as if it was very far away, and he couldn't hear it clearly. Yes, that's right. That's Motoko's voice. After devouring so many calamities, young Arbiter Ming's reflection had more or less grown, although this growth didn't seem right. Could it be that Tangi, that bad girl, did something in there again? Why did that voice sound so similar to hers? Huaisha sighed, took a step back, and waved goodbye to the girl. He turned around and disappeared into the darkness. In the silence, among the blinking crows, Hina was still stunned, staring blankly at Miss Huaiji's back as she left. She pressed down on her hair that she had just ruffled. She didn't know why, but her face was red and hot. But she still didn't understand what had happened. She actually felt a little regretful. Miss Huaiji was very hot. Miss Huaiji needed to vent. And then Miss Huaiji knocked on her door in the middle of the night. Then, shouldn't the next scene be Miss Huaiji violently pouncing on her and doing all sorts of unspeakable things to her? As she thought about it, she couldn't help but giggle. Then she suddenly felt her nose heat up and blood flowed out. Too exciting. 3 minutes later, on the other side of Riken's manor, in an empty and quiet tea room, outside the tea stove, an old man who was sitting cross-legged suddenly raised his eyebrows, glanced towards the north, and smiled strangely. She's gone. He made a move just like that. Hooper raised his eyebrows. This doesn't seem like his style. I thought he would keep touching until the end and be too lazy to get involved in this trouble. She's gone, that's right. Guashuk picked up the teacup, sipped the dark tea, and took a deep breath, although my sense of smell is delayed, and my sense of taste is incomplete. But this old man's sense of hearing is still at its original level. There are 2 heartbeats missing in the manor, and they flew to the sky, should be the location of Miss Hina's courtyard. 2. Hoopa couldn't believe it. Are you sure it's 2? He still has Miss Hina with him? No, Miss Hina's heartbeat is still there. Guashuk drank the tea in the cup and laughed strangely. There's another heart in his body, another heart that doesn't belong to him. Parasite or curse? It's neither. Guashuk shook his head. That's a blessing that this old man has never seen before. From the abyss? No, it should be a blessing comparable to the gods. Although I don't know how big of a disaster this heavy blessing will attract. But for Miss Hina, it shouldn't be a problem. That guy, Hoopa sighed angrily, not knowing whether it was out of unhappiness, jealousy, or helplessness. After shaking her head, she looked down at the time on her phone, calculating the time. Yishueya should be in the capital by now. Miss Yi always likes to do unexpected things. Maybe she's already in Osaka or Edo, but she probably won't get involved in the matters here in Nara. I always feel that Yishueya is the kind of person who likes to meddle in other people's business. That's right, but how do I put it? Guashuk thought for a moment, then said, for example, that child doesn't like to eat someone else's treat. Instead, he likes to organize his own meal. Him being willing to come this time is already giving Xian Niao face. Is it really okay to tell me this kind of thing? Why can't I tell you? Guashuk asked back in confusion. As the person in charge here in Nara, of course you should know these things. Make the plan clear, and let the people who do the work know it clearly. Even if they have to die as a last resort, they should know what they are sacrificing for. Although Xian Niao is a stingy old man, he's always been generous to the younger generation. The company's atmosphere is really friendly. Hoopa shrugged, not knowing whether he should feel honored or resentful. The benefits are not bad. Guashuk grinned, revealing a mouth full of loose teeth, and smiled very happily. The hairtail this old man makes every year is very delicious, right? Dead silence. Hoopa's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. You, that's right. The Dongsha's dried hairtail is all imported from me. Is that strange? I even specifically told them to give you the biggest share. Don't tell me Chu Hongqin took it for himself? After a long silence, Hoopa looked away. The seaweed is not bad. Ha! This old man will get you more later. Guashuk laughed happily, put down the teacup, and got up to leave. When people were old, they had to take care of their health and couldn't stay up late like before. After washing up, they should go to bed at 5 o'clock. This old man had always been good at taking care of his health. But before he left, he turned back and asked, "Staying up late will hurt your stomach. Do you want me to cook some porridge for you?" Hoopa wanted to say no, but the porridge he cooked was too fragrant, so she could only nod. Watching the old man leave, she sighed, picked up her phone, and dialed the number of tomorrow's news editorial department. Soon, a female voice picked up. "Hello, who is it?" I see Hoopa." She shook her head, helplessly. "This is the mountain. There are no vending machines around. Is the phone not good?" The female voice instantly became serious. "Miss Hoopa, the phone has radiation." Hoopa was speechless, only feeling that she would never come out. What radiation? You are tomorrow's news. Would she still believe in this mess of old people's pseudoscience? Maybe in order to guard against the brain control of the Astronomy Society, these people wear tinfoil hats every day. Let me see. According to the special news service you ordered, yes, the first page of information on the key people in Nara City has already been compiled. The sound of tapping on a keyboard came from the other end of the phone. Immediately after, he sighed and said, Amazing, amazing. Right now, the city of Nara is gathering. At this critical moment, there are more than 400 ascendants wandering around the city. Not only are there Ingzhou people, there are also many foreigners. There are even more wanted criminals. What are you doing? Fighting the Holy Grail War? What's the Holy Grail War? The woman on the phone was stunned for a long time. You don't know? No. Don't you Ingzhou people watch anime? Forget it. Back to the topic. There are more than 80 people with a threat level of B or above. What about those related to my relatives? That's not a small number. The sound of typing on a keyboard could be heard. Brother Knight Dew from the enraged groups Thermal Union from Edo, Unclean Monk Coin from the Cloud Nation, Million Gold Bruce from Africa, Dustin the Hammer, Nathan the Ice Stone, Satoichi the Sixth, Yiksha Takeuchi from Shinano. Say, is Nara really all right? Is it okay to be so lively? It will be even more lively before daybreak. Hoopa sighed, faintly. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, I have a piece of information for you. HM? Exclusive news. I like it. The woman tapped on the keyboard. Name? Age. Gender. Be more specific. I can give you a discount. Let me think. Hoopa couldn't hide his bad taste, and finally thought of a nickname. It's information related to the headless witch white paper Motoko. Soon, after a short exchange, a regretful voice came from the other end of the phone. This news is D rank. It's okay. When the price rises to A rank tomorrow, just remember to pay. Ignoring the other party's doubts, Hoopa happily hung up the phone. In the silence, the kneeling samurai girl narrowed her eyes and stared at the night sky outside the window. It was as if she could see Nara, who was immersed in the deep night sky through the tall wall and the forest, as well as through the long distance. The bloody battle hidden under the turbulent water surface, and the depth charge that was about to fall from the sky, causing terrifying waves. When that time came, everyone's expressions would be very interesting, right? Chapter 637. It was 4:45 in the morning. In the quiet night, the pale moonlight shone through the gaps between the dark clouds, faintly illuminating the corners of the ancient city of Nara. The bustling city during the day was now completely silent. In Ingzhou, except for a few cities, the difference between day and night was so clear. Except for the capital, Kyoto, and the trade center of Edo, it was difficult to see any other business after 6 o'clock in the morning other than a 24-hour convenience store. The only places with lights on were the izakaya that was open late at night. As for the rest of the world, everything else had fallen into silence and darkness. It was like a deliberate division, turning the deep night into a forbidden zone for those who couldn't understand. When the starlight was blocked, the world was dark. Now, who knew how many ascendants were wandering in the darkness, searching for every trace under the huge bounty? Unlike the laissez-faire of the looming hall, the charm of money was too terrifying. For the power and wealth that the Riken family represented, the price they had to pay now was but a drop in the ocean. The generous candidates had been throwing money out in an endless stream these past few days, casting a net to recruit any experts who wanted to be hired. If the quality wasn't enough, quantity would make up for it. Just by looking at the huge bounties and the huge number of participants on the collection of 10,000 sins, one could understand what kind of hunting ground Nara had become in the dark night. In the dead silence, the night was broken by the roar of a motorcycle engine. The darkness was illuminated by the huge headlights, like a burning flame. They openly passed through the city, not hiding their existence. That was undoubtedly a sound that every Ingzhou person was familiar with. The biker gang. The roar of the engine was accompanied by excited laughter. Big brother, look, I caught another one. On the huge, heavy motorcycle, there was a majestic flag that flapped in the wind. The young man sitting on the motorcycle had a rather cool and exaggerated blonde hair. He wore sunglasses and dragged a chain in his hand. He was dragging a person who had been scraped on the ground until it was a bloody mess. He was excitedly showing it to his brother, who was squatting at the entrance of the park. The clothes of the two brothers were exactly the same, and they were filled with Buddhist scriptures and other unknown words. However, the thick ink characters that represented their names on the back were completely different. On the back of the golden-haired little brother was written "Boiling Might," while on the back of the burly big brother with fluttering black hair and heavy makeup of a heavy metal musician was written "Bloody Night Sorrow." The infamous berserk duo from the Fire Lightning Association, the Speed brothers who dominated Kanagawa, had arrived at the ancient capital of Nara. But when the eldest brother lowered his head and looked at the person being dragged over by the iron chain, he frowned. This isn't right. He looks so embarrassing. He doesn't look like a murderer. Barney, you idiot. Look carefully. This guy is using a gun. If he uses a gun, he can't even cut a chicken's neck with a knife. How can he kill people with it? With that, he pulled out a pistol from the guy's pocket and threw it into the trash can. Barney Boilingway was stunned for a long time and found it hard to accept. But big brother, look at this guy. He's worth some money, right? He's a piece of trash. He can't be exchanged for money. The Bloody Night Sorrow pinched his cigarette and sighed helplessly. It's already the sixth one. Barney, don't catch him randomly. The employer won't pay. Hurry up and throw it away. Throw it away. Throw it where? Just find a trash can. Forget it. Throw it into the river. It's too troublesome to sort the trash. Don't trouble the cleaners. Also, don't spit everywhere. And the big brother suddenly paused for a moment. He raised his head abruptly and looked into the darkness. His expression gradually became gloomy. Did you bring someone back? Barney was stunned and shook his head frantically. When he turned around, he saw the huge shadow. It was right under the flickering street lights. Nemo! He was like a human-shaped mountain. He wore a bamboo hat on his head, and the kasaya on his body had been dyed scarlet, as if he was delivering the souls of the dead. He raised one hand in front of his chest and lowered his head to chant scriptures. In his other hand, he held a mace that was as tall as an ordinary person. The heavy and thick iron mace was covered with sharp protrusions that looked like teeth. It seemed to be dotted with wisps of golden paint, which made the blood-red color look even more vivid. When the bamboo hat was slowly raised, it revealed the sharp horns that grew crookedly on his forehead, as well as the greenish-purple ferocious smile. At that moment, the expressions of the two brothers gradually turned cold. The impure monk Guoying. Go away, fatty. This isn't the area you're in charge of. The big brother slowly stood up and pulled out a baseball bat that had been hammered with countless nails from behind him. He spat on the ground. Don't you even know how to be polite? Everywhere in the world is the land of Buddha. Is there any place that this humble monk can't go? The burly monk, who looked like a devil, took a step forward and carried his ghost gold mace. The blood in his smile spread. This humble monk came here specially to pray for the two benefactors. Benefactors? The big brother grinned. A cold smile appeared on his thick Gothic makeup. The baseball bat in his hand shot out lightning. I don't have anything to give you. Don't you still have your life? The ghost monk Guoying laughed sharply. The muscles under his blood-stained monk robe bulged. Let this humble monk send the two benefactors to the Western paradise. Namo, become Buddha. At that moment, following Guoying's roar, a violent roar suddenly spread out. The body that was as huge as a mountain broke through the air without any warning. Its speed was unbelievably fast. The ghost gold mace in its hand had already smashed a shocking depression in the ground. But the moment the iron mace smashed down, a motorcycle with lightning speed had already appeared out of thin air. It carried the Goth biker brothers, broke through the hurricane, and advanced at full speed. It rose up along with the ghost gold mace. The net weight of 2 tons, coupled with its terrifying speed and power, all rolled onto Guoying's face along with the crazily spinning wheels. The bamboo hat was shattered. The huge impact caused the burly ghost monk to take 3 steps back. But his face was still ferocious and bloodthirsty. Wisps of blood-red light constantly seeped out of the sharp horns on his forehead. The 3 treasures of Namel convert. Guoying laughed strangely and looked around at the biker brothers. Today is a good day for the 2 benefactors to become Buddhas. As the motorcycle galloped, the 2 brothers' huge vehicles had already reached the 2 ends of the square. The chain and the bat were aimed at Guoying from afar. Car splitter, car splitter, car splitter. Barney twisted the accelerator excitedly and roared excitedly. Fire and lightning will night do bitter brothers, blood night sorrow ghost, exploding cooking way, fair and square, join in. Let's go, EIBO. The Goth biker brothers coldly growled. An electric light burst forth. The overlapping loud sounds of the engines turned into thunder and soared into the sky. Rampage Scamper was about to begin. But at that moment, everyone's movements came to an abrupt halt. They were frozen in place. Frozen because a sharp sound rang out from above the vault of heaven. The ear-piercing sound overlapped in one place, ravaging everyone's eardrums and spreading in all directions. It was the high-pitched chirping of birds. Like countless metals rubbing against each other, they swept across the sky, and the wind whistled. From the street lamps, from the eaves, from the treetops, from the high-voltage cables, they appeared from all directions, unknowingly. The entire square was surrounded by countless black birds. Those huge crows' bodies glowed with a metallic light. Their scarlet eyes looked down, full of hunger and mockery. This place was already under the gaze of the flock of crows. Then, above the gloomy sky, the thin starlight and the incomplete moon disappeared without warning, because something drifted over from afar, above the vault of heaven, and swallowed all the light, right above their heads. A shadow that constantly changed shape emerged. Rolling darkness surged, appearing from a higher place in the vault of heaven and rapidly descending. Like a blazing meteorite, after cruelly destroying the sky, it cast the shadow of disaster. Just by staring, one could feel the terrifying darkness that came from the abyss. Even if one closed their eyes, they could feel the malevolence behind them. At that moment, the endless darkness suddenly dissipated. It was replaced by a figure that was falling toward the ground, carrying flames. It broke through the layers of hurricanes and finally descended from the sky. Countless clouds of dust flew up. In the tremor of the earth, a pale white skeleton-like figure emerged from the center of the square, with a few strands of scarlet long hair flying in the wind, as if it was burning. She stood in the shadow for a long time. Her eyes that were lit by the flames looked around. She looked at her opponents around her, the corner of her mouth curled up in a happy arc. First time a crow is on a plane. It's really fast. A soft and hoarse voice echoed in the square. I'm not late, right? Ah, Big Brother, look. In the midst of his shock, Barney could not help but exclaim, pointing at the figure that descended from the sky, and shouted at Big Brother Goth, "What a beautiful woman! Can I go and ask for her number?" "Are you an idiot? Barney, shut up!" Blood Knight Sorrow pressed his head. "This is not a place for you to strike up a conversation." Under the illumination of the flickering street lights, the shadow slowly dissipated, revealing a stunning face, as well as a pair of eyes that were already filled with scarlet red. In his hand, the sharp sound of steel rubbing against each other sounded again. Countless steel feathers gathered in the air, overlapping into a complicated blade pattern. The hatred that gathered into a substance turned into a bloody light flowing between the blades, emitting a piercing aura of brutality. "Don't be afraid. I came here just to fight with you." Why Sure explained gently, "If you're afraid, then run away. Remember to tuck your tail between your legs. I won't stop you." Faster than him was the roar from Ghost Monk. His huge body broke through the air without any warning. After crossing a distance of dozens of meters, his huge body had already shrouded Huai Sure in the shadow. On his head, a second sharp ghost horn broke out of his flesh, causing the brutality of his aura to increase tenfold. Nemo, Karma, who had fallen into madness, laughed wildly. "Convert to Buddhism. Convert to monk. Convert to Dharma. Convert to Buddha." In his hand, the huge ghost gold staff had already been swung from behind his shoulder to forward, tearing through the fragile air, setting off a violent wind, and smashing down. Just the wind pressure made the stone slabs on the square fly up like thin paper. And the ghost gold staff, which was covered with sharp teeth, had already surpassed the speed of wind, breaking through the limit of the speed of sound and stepping into the realm of Mach. This was no longer a level that humans could reach. It was the power of a ghost, through and through. In the face of this attack, the flesh and blood body was not worth mentioning. The ground roared, the square cracked, and the whole ground suddenly sank. The broken water pipes broke through the broken ground like a waterfall, spewing out mud. Then, the spreading aftershock was cut into pieces by the brutal blade. The blade of resentment broke through the engulfing hurricane, and with a swift slash, a crack suddenly appeared on Ghost Monk's monastic robe. Foul-smelling blood gushed out like spring water. It was so deep that the bone could be seen. However, that lightning-fast slash didn't manage to cut off his arm, only leaving behind a terrible wound. It could not damage his bones that had transformed into a Sarira state. Instead, it was injured by the rebound force. "Retreat in front of my golden body that has been blessed by Buddha, you evil woman of the outer path." Gua Ing scrutinized the slender figure in front of him. He raised his ghost gold staff again and grinned without pity. "If you surrender quickly, I can convert you and let you ascend to nirvana." Ha 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 ha! Without any mercy, he smashed down. The high-pitched sound of metal colliding spread, and sparks burst out. But this time, Gui Ying's expression stiffened. But it was blocked. The indestructible ghost gold staff was actually stopped in midair. It was blocked by the slender blade, and was unable to smash down even half an inch. "That's it." Huai Sure raised his head and looked at Gui Ying's stunned face. On the arm that he used to hold the blade, the skin that had been cracked by the shock seeped out wisps of sticky blood, but the blood did not fall to the ground. Instead, it went against gravity and went up along the arm, finally being swallowed by the greedy blade. The ghost gold staff growled, and wisps of pungent smoke spread out. That was the disaster left behind in the industrial cuisine, the terrifying heat hidden under the shell. Now, with the operation of the source substance, it rose from the sacred mark, urged by the curse, turned into flames, and spewed out. It enveloped Huai Shure's figure. He was burning. Staring at the enemy in front of him, he smiled. "It's my turn that you're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.